Chapter 1. The night was as dark as ink and the cold wind blew, causing the dilapidated courtyard door to become even more rotten. A few servants hurriedly walked through the courtyard. The one in the lead was slightly wider and wore a green robe. Her sleeves were half rolled up and she carried a food basket as she walked towards the innermost room. The courtyard was filled with a strange smell. The younger servant behind her whispered, "It's really smelly. I don't know why Master called that thing over. It's so scary." She couldn't help but exclaim and whispered into the servant's ear, "Don't tell me he wants to, Wang Guijia, speak less." The green-robed servant was slightly annoyed, "If other people hear it, they won't forgive you." The one called Wang Guijia immediately fell silent. When they reached the door, a young round-faced servant girl came out. She took the food basket from the green-robed servant and went back inside. After a while, she came out with the empty food basket. The green-robed servant took it and said to the round-faced servant, "Master ordered us to bring the person into the room." "Is it?" The round-faced servant was also shocked. "We don't need to know." The green-robed servant sighed and called out to Wang Guijia, "Come here and bring the person over." The room was lit up and the room became brighter. Wang Guijia pinched her nose and after a long time, she saw a thing sitting in a wooden basin. The moment she saw that thing, she almost vomited. These days, although she came with the green-robed servant to deliver food every day, she had never seen the person inside. The thing in the wooden basin could no longer be called a person. Her 4 limbs were chopped off and there was only a whole body in the wooden basin. Her hair was messy and there was some filth on it. She could vaguely see that it was a woman. The green-robed servant looked at her and a trace of sympathy flashed in her eyes. Although she didn't know who this woman was, it was really sad that she had fallen to such a state. Moreover, Master suddenly ordered them to bring the person out. The outcome was more likely to be disastrous. Wang Guijia was horrified and disgusted but she didn't dare to disobey orders. She braced herself and carried the wooden basin out of the room. The woman was also gentle and didn't struggle or cry. He seemed to have fallen asleep. As instructed, he placed the wooden basin in the master's bedroom. Wang Guijia was still muttering in his heart, "Why did the master place such a frightening thing in the room?" Suddenly, the woman in the wooden basin opened her eyes and happened to meet Wang Guijia's gaze. Strangely enough, this extremely terrifying woman only had a pair of extremely beautiful eyes. They were charming and full of emotion, but they were also spotless. They were as clear as the flowing water of the Jade Bone Mountain stream, cold and moving. Wang Guijia stared blankly for a long time before he turned around and left the room. Jiang Ruan slowly opened her eyes. After staying in the dark for a long time, she was at a loss of what to do with the brightness in front of her. When he realized the situation he was in, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. She was the eldest legitimate daughter of the Minister of War, the former Beauty Ruan. But now, she had been turned into a human swine and would never be able to rise again. She recalled her father's words before she entered the palace at the age of 16, "Ruan, since you have entered the palace as a concubine, you have the entire Zhao family behind you. There is no need to worry." Her younger sister held her hand and wiped away her tears, "Ruan, you are Susu's benefactor. Even if I die, it will be difficult for me to repay this kindness." And he held her hand, "Wait a little longer, wait a few more days, and I will grant you the status of an official wife." But now, her father had already been promoted to the position of prime minister who supports the country, a first-rank official, and her stepmother had long since become the wife of the prime minister. Her younger sister was the mother of the nation, and that person had ascended to the throne. They had already thrown her to the back of their minds, to the extent that they had abandoned and killed her. When she was 5 years old, her birth mother died early and her older brother died on the battlefield. Her concubine was raised to be the second wife. A wandering Taoist priest who passed by calculated that her 8 characters would bring bad luck to her father and mother, so she was sent to the countryside. When she turned 14 and reached the marriageable age, Jiang Quan finally took her back to the Fu on account that she was his own flesh and blood. Not long after, news came from the palace that the young miss of the Jiang family was on the list of new concubines to be selected. The emperor suspected that the Jiang family was colluding with the eighth prince. At this time, the emperor summoned people to the palace. His intention was not to drink, but to restrain the eighth prince. There were only 2 daughters in the Jiang Fu. Jiang Su's health was not good, and her personality was even more delicate and pure. The emperor's decree could not be disobeyed. Under Jiang Quan's command, Jiang Yuan entered the palace and became Beauty Yuan. No matter how submissive she was, she couldn't bear to submit to the emperor and enter the palace at the age of a flower to wither. If it weren't for the fact that the eighth prince had been comforting her, she would have already committed suicide in the depths of the palace with a piece of white silk. Since she was a child, other than her dead brother and mother, no one had ever comforted and cared for her like this. She gave her heart to him and calmed down. She was willing to be a pawn of the Jiang family and him in the palace, delivering messages. Who would have thought that once the emperor was forced to abdicate, the emperor would die tragically, and they would imprison her, slander her as the one who killed the emperor, and give her the title of a demoness who brought disaster to the country. When she stood on the steps and saw her father's cold eyes, she finally understood that she had been abandoned. When the cunning hare is dead, the hound is cooked. She was locked in the dark prison, rescued, and thought that she had escaped with her life, but this was the beginning of the nightmare. Her sister, who was as elegant as a fairy, smiled faintly as she watched helplessly as her limbs were chopped off and she was made into a human swine. She was filled with despair, unwillingness, and anger, but then she heard the fairy-like person say, "Jijia knows that little sister usually likes to be clean, and I can't tolerate even a grain of sand. Little sister has already tolerated Jijia, this grain of sand, for more than 10 years. Today, it's time to pull it out." She smiled and added, "The eighth prince is going to make me the empress. The glory that Jijia has not enjoyed, little sister will enjoy it on your behalf." Only when the pain reached deep into her bones did she know what it meant to be numb. Jiang Yuan really couldn't think of a reason why Jiang Su hated her so much. However, Jiang Su seemed to have guessed her thoughts and said with a smile, "Isn't Jijia's mother the daughter of the General Fu? Doesn't Jijia rely on this identity to look down on little sister? What a pity, what a pity." She propped up her cheek and tilted her head, saying, "Yesterday, the General Fu was executed at noon for the crime of rebellion." She stared at Chang and said word by word, 103 people, their entire family will be executed." Jiang Yuan felt like she had been struck by lightning, and her mind was in chaos. The General Fu was her maternal grandfather's home. Although her mother had insisted on marrying Jiang Quan, angering the great General Zhao, and since then they had lost contact. But after all, blood was thicker than water. How could her heart not feel like it was being cut by a knife? She stared at Jiang Su, but the other only laughed mockingly. "Jijia is angry just like that? There's no hurry, I still have a big gift to give Jijia. We'll meet again in the future." Thus, Jiang Yuan was sent to a dark room. After struggling for a few days, she finally saw the light today. The door opened with a creak. A fat man reeking of alcohol grabbed the person in front of him, threw him on the bed, and was about to press him down. He vaguely looked like a little boy, and was struggling with all his might. When Chang An saw the boy's face, she suddenly turned pale with fright. That was Pei Er. Most of the women in the palace were unlucky. Many were unable to give birth to a son, and many died after giving birth. Pei Er's birth mother was only a little palace maid, and she died after giving birth to Pei Er. The emperor did not value this son of lowly birth. That day, for some reason, he gave the child to her to raise. After 6 years, she and Pei Er had long developed a mother-son relationship. Early on, when the palace revolted, she had ordered her personal palace maid to carry Pei Er and escape, but she still could not escape. "Mother! Mother!" Pei Er struggled and cried, but he could not avoid the hands that were caressing his body. Jiang Yuan only felt her whole body turn cold. She had long known that Marquis Li Dong loved to play with boys when she entered the palace. But now, she could only watch helplessly as her own son was humiliated by this demon. She shouted loudly, but could only make hoarse and muffled sounds. Li Dong looked at her with disgust. I don't know why, but the imperial concubine insists on watching me do things with this thing. It really disgusts my appetite. He thought about it, but still succumbed to the emperor's power. Not daring to make any other moves, he concentrated on teasing the boy who had fainted from the fall. Jiang Ruan sat in the wooden basin. Only now did she understand why Jiang Su Su had only left her a pair of eyes. Jiang Su Su wanted to watch her last relative die in front of her. She sat in the basin in a daze like a wooden puppet. Scenes of the past flashed before her eyes, her mother's defeated face before her death, her father's cold smile, eighth prince's promise, Jiang Su Su holding her hand and thanking her, the emperor's cold eyes, the suffering in the imperial harem, and finally, the struggling and crying Pei in front of her. Li Dong inadvertently turned his head, and unexpectedly saw the person in the wooden basin. He was so shocked that he fell off the bed and shouted, "Guards, guards!" The woman in the wooden basin had a wooden expression on her face. 2 streaks of blood and tears streaked down her cheeks, and she looked miserable and mournful. The servant who broke the door and entered was also stunned for a moment. He only felt that he had seen an evil spirit from hell, and his whole body turned cold. Li Dong was flustered and exasperated. What are you still standing there for? Beat her to death. In his fear, he had long thrown the Empress's orders to the back of his mind. In any case, the courtyard was filled with his people, so there was no need to worry about information leaking out. The servant came back to his senses and rushed over with the rod in his hand. Without any explanation, he hit the woman's head. No one heard the deepest curse in the heart of the person in the wooden basin. Even if she never reincarnated, even if she turned into ashes, she only wished to live and die as an evil spirit. Let the person who harmed her pay with blood. At the same time, in Yangping Palace. Your Majesty seems to be exceptionally spirited today. Jiang Su Su laughed lightly. The new emperor looked up at the woman opposite him. She wore a phoenix crown and red robe, and her exquisite face was set off by her noble attire. She looked like a fairy from the 9th heaven. Jiang Quan's youngest daughter was indeed elegant and beautiful. Is there still no news from Jiang Ruan? Suddenly, he asked in a low voice. Jiang Su Su's face darkened. No, Jie must have escaped with Pei. She must have worked hard all these years, but no matter what, she shouldn't have distrusted your Majesty. The new emperor thought of Jiang Ruan, but found that no matter how he tried to recall, Jiang Ruan was only a vague shadow in his mind. Her reputation was not good, and at best, she was a beautiful woman. He married the power behind the Jiang family, so there was no difference between Jiang Ruan and Jiang Su Su. Since Zhao Chang'an was already the former emperor's woman, he would never marry her. Although Jiang Ruan was already an abandoned chess piece, he still had some hesitation. After so many years in the palace, he had relied on Jiang Ruan to get through many dangerous situations. She had indeed helped him a lot. But, why didn't she wait for him to make a decision before escaping from the dark prison? He did not like this feeling of not being in control. With a cold snort, the new emperor said, "You don't know what's good for you. The time has come, let's go." Jiang Su Su curtsied and placed her hand on the man's palm. In the 18th year of Xuanda, the new emperor ascended the throne and made Jiang Shi his empress. Chapter 2. There were 3 houses with green tiles and red walls. The spacious farmyard was covered with a thick layer of snow. The big black dog that looked after the house walked to the door and lazily ate a bone from a broken bowl. It seemed to be frozen by the cold air and shrank back into its nest. It was New Year's Eve. The door was pasted with colorful New Year's pictures of the bountiful harvest. 3 fat red lanterns hung from the eaves. The sound of firecrackers could be heard from outside. The people in the house were talking and laughing. It was the time for the New Year's Eve dinner. Although it was a farmhouse meal, the 8 main dishes were made with care. There were meat and vegetables. There were spicy steamed base with black beans, braised pork with soy sauce, smoked chicken with tea, colorful shredded eggplant, lamb and onion dumplings, prawns of happiness, for happiness meatballs, and a hull full of gold and jade. At the side, there was a pot of extremely mellow sorghum wine. It was obvious that the owner's family was well off. It was very lively here. At the same time, the innermost and most remote courtyard of the farmhouse was deserted. In the only room, the candlelight in the room was dim, as if it was going to be extinguished soon. A tall young lady with a maid's bun sat in front of the room, carefully adding firewood to the brazier. The room was small. When the brazier was lit, a pungent smoke was immediately emitted. Another petite servant girl hurriedly ran over and casually picked up a worn-out cattail leaf fan on the ground and carefully fanned herself. She scolded, "Lian Xiao, be careful. Miss has not fully recovered yet, what if she chokes?" Lian Xiao curled her lips. Her expression was indignant, but she still lowered her voice and said, "I hope there's no smoke at all. Today, when I went to look for Zhonglan's family, I didn't say silver wire charcoal, just ordinary charcoal. She said that she had been using a lot these days and there was no more charcoal in the warehouse." Bah! Who is she lying to? It's the New Year's Eve. How can there be no charcoal in the house? She's just bullying us. If it wasn't for the fact that Miss is still sick and I don't dare to make her worry, I would have given her 2 slaps. You! The servant girl fanning herself sighed, "You should restrain your stubbornness. Even though this family has gone too far, we have no choice but to lower our heads under the eaves. If you really start a dispute, the one who will suffer is still the young lady." Lian Xiao looked at her with disdain. "Baiji, I really didn't know you were actually this timid. What is the status of this family? What is the status of our young lady? No matter what happened to young lady, with young lady's status, we can't let these lowly people bully you." Baiji shook her head. "You and I are both Mrs. Maidservants. Do you think I don't want Miss to be happy? It's just that there's been no news from the capital. I don't know how long Miss is going to stay here. It's fine if it's just a short period of time, but it's already the 4th year now. Has the master sent anyone to inquire about it? If you want to stay here for a long time, you will quarrel with them, and the one who will suffer in the end is the young lady." Lian Xiao didn't make a sound. After a while, she said in a low voice, "Don't tell me we're just going to let others bully us for nothing." Baiji could only sigh softly. The room fell into silence again. Only the crackling of the firewood could be heard. The 2 maidservants were still fanning themselves. No one noticed that the person on the bed had already woken up. It had been a while since Jiang Ruan had woken up. Naturally, she had heard every single word of Baiji and Lian Xiao's conversation. 3 days ago, when she had woken up from her bed, she had discovered that she had actually returned to 10 years ago. Everything that had happened in her past life was like an afternoon wet dream. Only she herself knew that a blood feud was not something that could dissipate in a dream. Since the heavens had given her a chance to start over, she would not hesitate to accept it and make good use of it. When she woke up 3 days ago, Baiji and Lian Xiao heaved a huge sigh of relief. Ever since she fell into the water, Jiang Ruan had been in a coma for more than 10 days. The doctors had all said that there was nothing they could do to save her. Zhang Lan's family even went out to inquire about the coffin. Who knew that she would wake up again? Lian Xiao held her hand and cried loudly. She kept saying that the heavens had blessed her. Jiang Ruan, however, narrowed her eyes. After dying once, not only did the events of her past life not vanish into thin air, but she remembered them very clearly. 4 years ago, when her mother passed away, the wandering Taoist priest who came to the Fu could tell at a glance that her 8 characters were extremely hard. It was truly the bane of her life. Jiang Quan had originally wanted to send her to the family temple. It was precisely because Jiang Su had knelt down to plead for mercy that Jiang Quan changed his mind and sent her to the countryside estate. Because of this, Jiang Ruan had always felt grateful towards Jiang Su. Now that she thought about it, the bullying and humiliation she suffered here was all thanks to Jiang Su and her mother. The estate was handed over to Zhang Lan's family to manage. Zhang Lan was greedy, stingy, and extremely fierce. She often scolded and insulted Jiang Yuan while pointing at the mulberry tree. Zhang Lan's husband, Chen Fu, was even more lazy and an alcoholic gambler. The two had a son and a daughter. The son, Chen Zhao, was extremely lecherous, and the daughter, Chen Fang, was sarcastic and unkind. When Jiang Yuan came, she brought a lot of jewelry. If it didn't fall into Zhang Lan's hands, then it was swindled away by Chen Fang. 10 days ago, Jiang Yuan accidentally fell into the water. It was also because Chen Zhao was groping her by the pond. Unable to bear the humiliation, Jiang Yuan jumped into the water. When Chen Zhao saw that he had gotten into trouble, he hurriedly escaped. By the time Lian Xiao and Bai Ji called for people to rescue Jiang Yuan was already unconscious. It was the 12th month of the winter. The pond water was icy cold and piercing to the bone. In addition, under Zhang Lan's harsh treatment these past few years, Jiang Yuan's body had become increasingly weak. Catching a cold was like adding snow to snow, and she immediately fell seriously ill. Jiang Yuan remembered very clearly that she had not woken up so early. After she woke up, she fell ill. More importantly, not long after, there were rumors that she was seducing men at such a young age, and that she had no self-respect for her precious body. She had taken the initiative to seduce Chen Zhao and fell into the water after failing. Thinking about it, it was also Zhang Lan's doing. She pushed all the dirty water onto her. Thanks to this dirty water, in the future, when Jiang Yuan's appearance grew, she also lost the title of a demoness. Now that she had woken up early, the rumors had not yet spread. Presumably, Zhang Lan had not thought of this, so she could take this opportunity to send her a New Year's gift. There was no future to continue living in this rural residence that was bullied and humiliated by others. For years later, she would be sent to the palace as a chess piece. This was also something she could not bear. Moreover, being taken advantage of was not her goal. Everything had to be done, and Chen Zhao was the first to be dealt with. Jiang Yuan looked out the window. The sound of firecrackers could be heard faintly outside the house. With only the three of them in the house, it seemed even more deserted. She slowly sat up. Bai Ji heard the sound of her getting up and hurriedly stood up to greet her. "Miss, you're awake. Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere?" Jiang Yuan shook her head. "What time is it now?" "It's about the Su period," Bai Ji replied. Lian Xiao put down the fan. "Miss, are you hungry? I'll go to the kitchen and bring some food over." Most of the young ladies and madams who lived in the rural residence were criminals, but they were still masters. Unless they received special care, they would not be in such dire straits that they could not even be compared to a servant. Even on New Year's Eve, the food had not been sent over early. It was really thought-provoking. Before Jiang Yuan could reply, she heard the sound of knocking on the door. A clear and melodious voice said from outside, "Miss, I've come to deliver the New Year's Eve dinner." Lian Xiao was stunned. Jiang Yuan said, "Come in." The door creaked open, and a maidservant dressed in festive attire came in. She carried a food basket in her hand and said with a smile, "Auntie Lan has ordered me to deliver the food. Miss, please eat some." Bai Ji saw that Jiang Yuan had not moved for a long time, so she lowered her head in puzzlement. Just then, she saw a flash of emotion in Jiang Yuan's eyes. Then, she raised her head and smiled slightly. Chapter 3. This was an order for him to leave. Qiuyan didn't know what to do at that moment. Naturally, he hoped to immediately leave this oppressive room, so he hurriedly nodded his head in agreement. The faint sense of superiority he had when he first arrived was nowhere to be seen. Qiuyan raised her head and smiled. "That's me." Qiuyan's face paled even more. She said hatefully, "Yes. Of course not." Lian Xiao was a straightforward and shrewish person. Without even thinking, she said, "Miss, you need not worry. Naturally, you will not stay in the manor forever. In a few days, Master will come to pick you up." Her voice was soft and smiling. Qiao Yan subconsciously wanted to nod in agreement, but she suddenly realized that the entire Zhuangzi had made new clothes, but only the master and servants in front of her were left out. No matter what, she couldn't say this. Just as he was about to gloss it over, he heard Jiang Yuan lightly say, "The two maidservants by my side are clumsy. Even the clothes they wear are not as festive as Qiao Yan Jiejies. There is something that Big Sister Qiao Yan said wrongly. I'm not joking. Although Big Sister Qiao Yan is a servant, her life seems to be more comfortable and dignified than mine." Qiao Yan stood on the spot and slowly clenched his fists. Jiang Yuan pinched the space between her eyebrows and said, "Only for a while and I will feel sleepy. My body has yet to fully recover and I am unable to personally wish Lan Momo good luck for the new year. I will have to trouble Qiao Jia to apologize on my behalf." As she finished speaking, she instructed Bai Ji, "Hurry and send Qiao Jia off." Qiao Yan bit her lips, "Miss, aren't you making things difficult for me? A fine bird chooses a tree to nest in. Humans strive for higher places, while water flows to lower places. Sister Qiao Yan's actions are only human nature. Don't be shy." She tilted her head and giggled, "This is a good thing. If one day Sister Qiao Yan really becomes the 13th mistress, I will definitely send her a rouge gift. Sister Qiao Yan is so dignified, I think this dignity is also earned by Sister Qiao Yan's intelligence." Qiao Yan was startled, and a chill slowly rose from the soles of her feet. Her entire face instantly turned pale, and she bit her lip as she stared wide-eyed at Jiang Yuan, unable to utter a single word. After Baiji sent Qiao Yan out, Lian Qiao asked, "Miss, what happened just now? How did Qiao Yan get involved with Officer Ma's second son? Your name is Qiao Yan, right?" The person on the bed spoke. His voice was still a bit hoarse, but strangely, it carried a subtle emotion. "Why wait? Qiao Yan will send us back to the capital soon." After a while, Qiao Yan mustered up her courage, puffed out her chest and said, "I don't know what Miss is talking about." The first half of her sentence was said boldly and confidently, but when it came to the second half, she somehow felt guilty. She and second young Master Ma have long been together in secret. Now, it is the time when they are deeply in love, Jiang Yuan said. Jiang Yuan was not in a hurry. She brought the warm tea closer to her lips and took a small sip. At the same time that Qiao Yan put down the food basket, she also quickly sized up the room. This was the first time that she had come to Jiang Yuan's room. She noticed that the narrow room was filled with a kind of dilapidated and decaying smell. There were even traces of rainwater seeping through the cracks in the eaves. The quilt on the bed was also extremely thin. Not to mention waving a hand, even the ordinary utensils were extremely dilapidated. Living in such a damp and dark room, it would be strange not to feel weak. At a glance, it did not look like the boudoir of a noble family's young lady. Even the lowest servant in the manor would not be so shabby. Bai Ji and Lian Xiao stood by Jiang Yuan's side to protect her, while the others stared closely at Qiao Yan. In the manor, besides the three of them, master and servants, everyone else had ulterior motives. Lian Xiao was suddenly enlightened, no wonder she was so scared. Bah, she really is a lowly person. She actually has no sense of shame. After all, she was a teenage girl. She immediately blushed, "But miss, how did you know about these things?" In her previous life, a few years later, Qiao Yan and second young Master Ma's affair was discovered by someone. This affair was exposed. Second young Master Ma was unscathed, but Qiao Yan was drowned in a pig cage. Before she was drowned, Qiao Yan was tortured to the point that she was delirious. She kept saying that she was second young Master Ma's 13th Yinyang. Presumably, when they were deeply in love, second young Master Ma promised her this. However, in the end, Qiao Yan did not have the life to become 13th Yinyang. Naturally, Jiang Yuan would not reveal this matter. Qiao Yan Jijie is an intelligent person, Jiang Yuan interrupted her, otherwise, how could she be 13th Yinyang? Qiao Yan had immersed herself in the manor for a long time. She understood that although Zhang Lan's family was greedy and harsh, They would not dare to treat a young miss like this if they did not have the permission of their superiors. Since it was her master's intention, Qiu Yan naturally would not interfere. Jiang Yuan usually had even fewer opportunities to go out than Lian Qiao and Bai Ji. Throughout the year, she had endless work to do in the courtyard. How could she have the opportunity to encounter such matters? Lian Qiao was puzzled. However, Jiang Yuan did not answer her question and only said, "Lian Qiao, do you want to stay here for the rest of your life?" The servant girl who came was called Qiu Yan. She was the head servant of the manor. Although her status was not as high as Zhang Lan's, she still had some prestige. Sending Qiu Yan to deliver food on New Year's Eve was something that had never happened in the past few years. Presumably, Zhang Lan wanted to shut everyone up and make it seem that she was extremely concerned about the bedridden Jiang family's young Mississippi. These words were a little strange. Qiu Yan could not make sense of it, but she still smiled and said, "It's all Auntie's orders. This servant is only a servant. If you're talking about looks, young miss must be joking." Her words were too sharp and completely inconsistent with her master's gentle tone. For some reason, Qiu Yan actually felt a burst of nervousness. She could not help but raise her head to look at the person on the bed. The candlelight was dim. The girl on the bed took the hot tea that Bai Ji handed over. The steam that rose from the tea covered half of her face. Her expression could not be clearly seen. Only her long and drooping eyelashes drew a graceful arc. She looked exceptionally flirtatious. Jiang Yuan sighed softly, "Auntie Lan is really considerate. Did she make new clothes for everyone in the manor?" Lian Qiao was stunned and subconsciously looked at Jiang Yuan. However, she saw the girl slowly and delicately yawn again. Under the straight bridge of her nose, her rosy lips that had just sipped the tea curved into a small arc. Jiang Yuan's smiling voice could be heard, "Qiu Yan Jijie is so dignified. In the future, when you are of age, you will definitely be released to marry into a good family. The second son of official Ma's family outside the city is not bad. Second son Ma already has 12 yinyangs, so Qiu Yan Jijie can be ranked as the 13th yinyang." The suspicions in Lian Qiao's heart were too deep. Not only that, she also discovered that today, Jiang Yuan seemed to have changed into a completely different person. She, who had always been meek and submissive, had actually so brazenly threatened Qiu Yan. Even when she was talking about these filthy matters, there was not the slightest change in her expression, as if she was talking about an extremely ordinary family matter. When Bai Ji and Qiu Yan walked to the door, Jiang Yuan opened her mouth again. "Oh, that's right, Qiu Yan Jia, previously, I mentioned the clothes of my two servant girls. Since it's already the new year, I also wish to look at them with some interest. Qiu Yan Jia, please think of a way to make them look more festive." Jiang Yuan smiled. She knew better than anyone else when they would come to pick her up. She did not have the patience to wait for that time, nor did she want to wait. Chapter 4. On the first day of the new year, the sound of firecrackers could be heard early in the morning on the long street. The children in the farmstead came out one after another to set off firecrackers to open the door. After the firecrackers were set off, the ground was covered in red, shining like the clouds. It was called Mantang Red. Everyone in the manor began to get busy. It was unknown whether it was intentional or if they had forgotten about Jiang Yuan and her two servants, but after the New Year's Eve dinner, no one came to the Three People's courtyard. Bai Ji lit a brazier next to the door and used half of her body to block the door. She fanned out the choking smoke so that there was a little warmth in the room. The sunlight from outside shone into the courtyard. The courtyard was the most remote and dilapidated one. Not only did the eaves leak all year round, but there were also voles that often scurried about. The quilts sent by the manor were thin to begin with, and many of them had been bitten by the mice. Bai Ji sighed and could not help but turn her head to look at Jiang Yuan, who was sitting on the bed hugging the blanket. Jiang Yuan leaned against the horse-brown pillow that was sewn from a coarse cloth. The quilt covered her chest as she hung her head in a daze. After being sent to the manor for 4 years, Zhang Lan's family had been short of food and clothing. As a result, she had matured later than the average girl, and her hair had a withered yellow color. At this moment, the sunlight shone in through the window, giving her long hair a flowing luster. Her slightly pursed lips seemed more rosy than usual, and her facial features appeared delicate and regular. The most unique thing about her was that she was sitting quietly, but she was quieter than usual, as if she was a different person, strangely strange. Baiji fiddled with the firewood in the brazier and recalled how Lian Xiao had told her everything about Qiu Yan last night. In the end, she said, "Why do I feel that something is not quite right with Miss? The change is simply too great. Could it be that the meekness you showed in the past was all a lie?" Baiji did not know how to answer her. Actually, what Lian Xiao had said was right. Jiang Yuan had changed too much, especially as her personal maids. Ever since Jiang Yuan had been sent to the rural residence 4 years ago, she had always been washing her face with tears. Zhang Lan's family had made things difficult for her in every possible way, but in the end, she didn't even have the energy to shed tears. She could only silently endure it, but the sadness and depression in her heart made her even more cowardly and taciturn. Yesterday, his attitude towards Qiuyan was like that of a different person. Baiji was puzzled. After a serious illness, could it be that a person's temperament would change as well? However, no matter how much she had changed, Jiang Yuan was still their master. Jiang Yuan's current attitude was completely different from the past, which was perhaps a good thing. While he was lost in thought, Lian Xiao had already walked in with an oiled paper bag, almost knocking over the brazier. "Be careful," Baiji reprimanded him softly. "Why are you being so rash? I went to buy some New Year's goods." Lian Xiao was not annoyed and continued to smile as she stepped into the room. She placed the oiled paper on the table and opened it. She said to Jiang Yuan, "Miss, come and eat some too. The spring cakes are still warm." Baiji felt strange. Where did you get it? In all likelihood, Zhang Lan's family would not be so kind-hearted. Because of Chen Zhao's matter, Zhang Lan was rather resentful towards Jiang Yuan. The servants would not take the initiative to touch this bad luck, and they did not have any money to buy snacks on hand. It seems that an important person from the manor is about to arrive. Everyone has been making preparations these past few days, and there are more snacks prepared. I have some friendship with the new Yuri in the kitchen, so I asked for a few. She smiled. Although we are a little rough, we still have to celebrate the new year. Miss, take a look, there is also this. She took out a bracelet made of copper coins from her bosom. When I came back, I spent 10 copper coins to buy this. It's a good omen, and the coming year will be smooth sailing. Baiji snorted. What's the use of buying copper coins for? Could it be that you are praying that Miss will be rolling in wealth in the coming year? What's wrong with rolling in wealth? Lian Xiao said, money makes the world go round. What's wrong with having silver? If there was silver, these people would definitely not dare to bully Miss like this. Baiji hurriedly gave Lian Xiao a look, reminding her that Jiang Yuan was still there and that she should stop talking. Lian Xiao knew that she had made a slip of the tongue, so she quickly shut her mouth and carefully glanced at Jiang Yuan. However, Jiang Yuan shook her head and slowly lifted the quilt to walk down. Lian Xiao hurriedly came over to support her. Jiang Yuan walked to the table and sat down. She looked at the bracelet on the table and reached out to put it on. She gestured and said, "It's a good omen." Lian Xiao's heart turned sour. She thought to herself, which family's young miss doesn't have a pile of jewels and accessories of all sizes for the new year? Yet, my miss only has a copper coin bracelet worth 10 copper coins. Even in an ordinary family, it is not worth mentioning. Turning her head to hide the sourness in her eyes, Lian Xiao smiled and said, "Miss, have another spring cake." Jiang Yuan shook her head. "I can't eat it, you guys go ahead." She paused and said, "I don't have any silver to reward you guys. Follow me to the Zhuangzi. These 4 years, you guys have suffered a lot. Fortunately, this year, we don't have to suffer anymore." Yes, 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 Baiji hurriedly said, "This year, Miss has been blessed with good fortune. Everything has been very smooth." Jiang Yuan knew that she had misunderstood her meaning. She did not explain and only looked out the window. The weather outside is very good, let's go out for a walk. Baiji and Lian Xiao looked at each other in surprise. On normal days, besides working, Jiang Ruan was not willing to take the initiative to go out for a walk. The servants of the Zhuangzi would always ridicule the three of them when they saw them. Lian Xiao's temperament was shrewish. She could manage to subdue some people, but it was to no avail. After a long time, Jiang Ruan became unwilling to meet people and always stayed in her courtyard. Good, good, good. Lian Xiao smiled and went to rummage through the chest of clothes. Miss, which clothes do you want to wear? Jiang Ruan laughed in her heart. In reality, it was all the same no matter which clothes she wore. When she came to the Zhuangzi, she had brought a lot of accessories with her. However, not long after, those accessories and clothes were swindled away by Zhang Lan and Chen Fang. In the end, she did not even have a piece of her own clothes left. Chen Fang took away all her clothes and replaced them with coarse and tattered old clothes. Not to mention the appearance and the material of the clothes, in winter, the cotton inside the cotton-padded clothes was extremely thin. It was difficult to even resist the cold. You choose, Jiang Ruan said. Lian Xiao and Baiji picked for a long time before they finally chose a dark green, round-buttoned cotton-padded jacket. Underneath it was a wide, yellow, thick cotton skirt that Baiji had made smaller, and a beige cloak was draped over her head. Fearing that her exquisite hair would not match the clothes, Baiji combed the simplest bun for her. Because she was young, it looked surprisingly suitable. This outfit could not be considered festive. However, Jiang Ruan's skin was fair and her clothes did not appear rustic. Coupled with her calm and indifferent temperament, she was like a different person from her usual self. After tidying up, the three of them walked out of the courtyard. Lian Xiao suggested to walk on the streets. Just as they walked out of the large courtyard of the Zhuangzi, they bumped into a few people. A surprised voice called out, "Younger sister Wan." Lian Xiao frowned. Baiji also quietly shielded Jiang Ruan behind her. Jiang Ruan raised her head and the other person's shadow was clearly reflected in her eyes. It was Zhang Lan's youngest son, Chen Zhao. Chapter 5. Today, Chen Zhao had just returned from fooling around outside. Coincidentally, he saw a few people walking out of the courtyard. The girl in the middle had a delicate appearance. His eyes could not help but brighten. When he saw her clearly, he realized that it was Jiang Ruan. Usually, Jiang Ruan's attire was not as dignified as Chen Fang's, so Chen Zhao rarely paid attention to her. A few days ago, he had only suddenly thought of testing out the taste of an official's young miss. Who would have expected that this young miss would have such a fiery temperament? Unexpectedly, she had jumped into the water without saying anything. Thinking about it now, he had a bellyful of pent-up anger. Who knew that when he saw her today, his eyes would light up? Perhaps it was because it was the new year, he dressed up a little, but his facial features were extremely delicate. Most importantly, that calm and ice-cold temperament made him seem like a completely different person. Chen Zhao narrowed his eyes and carefully sized up the girl in front of him. Jiang Ruan was not more than 10 years old this year. Her physique was slightly childish, but there was also a sense of stability within it. Strangely, there was some maturity about her. When two completely different temperaments appeared on the same person, it made the other person seem to have a different kind of charm. Even though she was only a 10-year-old girl, Chen Zhao couldn't help but swallow his saliva. He had seen some young masters in the Chu martial arts club who had a special hobby of playing with young girls, but he didn't know what it felt like. Lian Xiao could not stand Chen Zhao's lecherous gaze on Jiang Ruan and her expression turned cold. Without thinking, she opened her mouth and said, "Impudent. Who allowed you to be so unruly and speak to your master like this?" Although her words were rather imposing, they did not have much effect. Chen Zhao was not afraid. He had also heard of the status of this distressed young miss in the capital. Looking at Zhang Lan's words, it was possible that Jiang Ruan would have to stay in this Zhuangzi for the rest of her life. Since this was the case, it would be best if he could play with her. Although he was thinking this way, Chen Zhao still smiled and bowed, it's Xiao's fault. Just now, I saw a few people walking over from afar and was wondering who the fairy-like younger sister in the middle was. She looked very unfamiliar. When I walked closer, I saw that it was Miss and couldn't control my emotions. Please forgive me. Once these words were spoken, not only Lian Xiao, but even Baiji's expression changed. She said angrily, "What nonsense are you talking about? How can you ruin my lady's reputation?" Chen Zhao took 2 steps back in surprise. Spoil Mrs. reputation? I have never thought of it like this. Young lady is of noble birth, how would I dare to have such thoughts? I only hope that young lady will not chase me away and let me look at you from afar. I will be satisfied. He had harmed many innocent girls in his daily life, and the moment he opened his mouth, he had a glib tongue. If a normal girl heard his words, she would either burst into tears in anger or blush in embarrassment. However, today was a little unusual. Jiang Ruan looked at him quietly. Her clear and bright eyes were like a cold lake in winter, without a trace of warmth. Her gaze was cold, but her lips curved into a shallow arc, as if she was watching a clown perform. There was no shame, no tears, just a cold and unmoving expression. Chen Zhao was startled, but Jiang Ruan replied unhurriedly, "Naturally, I will not chase you away." Lian Xiao and Baiji stared blankly. What did Jiang Ruan's words mean? Chen Zhao was also somewhat puzzled, but then he was secretly delighted. He glanced at the 2 servant girls complacently, thinking that this young lady was quite tactful. But now, it seemed that so what if she was a young lady of a noble family? After staying in the countryside for too long, she still lost her sense of propriety and shame. The day before yesterday, you accidentally pushed me into the pool. I caught a cold and was bedridden. Lan Momo invited a doctor for me and personally apologized to me, asking me to forgive you. I have already forgiven you, so naturally, I will not chase you away. Jiang Ruan's voice was soft and gentle, with a refreshing coolness, but Chen Zhao's heart sank when he heard it. After Jiang Ruan fell into the pool, in order to deceive others, he had only said that he had accidentally caused Jiang Ruan to fall. Jiang Ruan's words made Chen Zhao remember that in order to avoid arousing suspicion, he should not meet her as often as possible. But now that Jiang Ruan had said it, was it intentional or unintentional? Thinking of this, Chen Zhao looked at Jiang Ruan seriously. He saw that the girl was standing in the same place. The old and dull clothes on her did not make her look haggard, but instead made her skin as white as snow, her eyes as black as ink, and her eyebrows as black as ink. Between her eyebrows, there was actually a kind of austere charm. Chen Zhao was startled, but his gaze became infatuated. Since he had discovered that this Jiang family's young miss was interesting, he naturally would not let her go. There was plenty of time in the future, so there was no need to rush. Thinking of this, he giggled and bowed to Jiang Ruan again. It's all Zhao's fault, causing Miss to become so thin. Today, Miss is going out, so Zhao will not disturb you. I will pay a visit another day to apologize. Who wants you to pay a visit to apologize? Lian Xiao glared at him. Chen Zhao smiled and left. After Chen Zhao left, Lian Xiao and Baiji heaved a sigh of relief. Baiji frowned and said, "Miss, why did you say that just now? He is trouble, how could you?" Yes, Lian Xiao followed up, "I really wish I could gouge out both his eyeballs." Disgusting. I will gouge them out, Jiang Ruan said indifferently. If he wants to silently watch me from afar, then I will let him watch as much as he wants. Baiji and Lian Xiao looked at each other, only feeling that their young Mrs. tone was somewhat cold. After a pause, Baiji said, "Who cares about him, let's go out for a walk." These few days, there is nothing going on in the residence, so the East Street should be very lively. East Street? Jiang Ruan thought about it and shook her head. "No, let's go to the West Street." West Street? Baiji was somewhat hesitant. "Miss, why do you want to go to the West Street?" There are many beggars and commoners on the West Street, and since it is the new year, it will be even more chaotic. "Miss, it's better if you don't go there. There are many cosmetic shops and restaurants on the East Street, and there are also some interesting things." Why not go to the East Street for a walk? Jiang Ruan shook her head. Go to the West Street. Although her voice was soft, it was indeed unquestionable. Obviously, she had already made up her mind. Bai Ji was stunned, and suddenly felt a little awkward. Aya, let's listen to Miss, go to the West Street. Lian Xiao patted Bai Ji's shoulder. With us here, what is there to be afraid of? Moreover, it is broad daylight, there is no need to be so particular. If there is really a problem, there are still servants to protect you, miss, you can rest assured. Bai Ji could only nod, but she became more and more puzzled. The gap between the rich and the poor in the East Street and the West Street was a place where the poor people lived, so naturally, it was not as lively and prosperous as the East Street. Usually, her young miss did not have the intention to go to the West Street. Why did she suddenly have a sudden impulse today? Bai Ji felt that she could not understand her young miss's thoughts more and more. It was as if in one night, her young miss had grown 9 hearts. Being stared at by that pair of ink-black eyes, she felt a little cold. Lian Xiao, on the other hand, was extremely happy. Jiang Ruan was obviously enlightened. Compared to being meek and submissive, it was much better to have the appearance of a master. At least those people would not dare to bully her openly. Jiang Ruan did not pay attention to the thoughts of the 2 servant girls beside her, and only walked forward quietly. However, if one looked carefully, one could still see that her fingertips were slightly trembling. Some things, from the beginning, should have been changed. Chapter 6. How much are these red plums? Lian Xiao asked. Jiang Ruan shook her head. Just do as I said, these flowers are useful. How pitiful, Lian Xiao sighed. Lian Xiao held the porcelain bottle of red plums in her hand and finally could not help but ask, what does Miss want these plums for? Although they look good, there is no need to buy so many. Moreover, the flowers will wither after a few days, it would be better to eat a few spring cakes. You must be trying to swindle the little girl's money. She said softly, old sir need not be angry, there is right and wrong in the world, even if it is not clear at the moment, the truth will eventually come to light. Why harm yourself for a mouthful of turbid air? Wouldn't the loss outweigh the gain? The bazaar on West Street was the busiest place on West Street. Relatively speaking, it was also the place where crooks mixed with honest folk. There were all sorts of people. Because of this, it was not strange for anything to happen here, and the most common thing was to be robbed by thieves. Someone could not stand it and said, old man, why do you have to speak so harshly to a little girl? Don't tell me you have lived so long just to bully the young. Shameless. Bai Ji was shocked, and seeing Jiang Ruan's actions, she hurriedly said, Miss, don't, we better not get involved in this. A few children sat in front of the cosmetics shop and played with the buttons they had just picked up. Occasionally, they would raise their dirty faces to look curiously at Jiang Ruan and the other 2, and then turn their heads back to play with their things excitedly. This was one of them. As soon as the 3 of them reached the entrance of the market, they saw that there were 3 layers of people surrounding the market. They did not know what they were talking about. Seeing Jiang Ruan stop, Lian Xiao thought for a while and whispered a few words to Bai Ji. The 2 of them squeezed through the crowd and made a small path for Jiang Ruan. So expensive, Lian Xiao was shocked, I don't want it. Then, what could she do? A strange look flashed in Jiang Ruan's eyes. Jiang Ruan did not say anything. The few of them walked and walked until they reached the bazaar on West Street. Hey, seeing this, the peddler hurriedly said, forget it, just give me 3 copper coins, no less. The children at home are still waiting to eat a hot meal. These flowers are not for viewing, Jiang Ruan said as she walked forward, they are for you. Jiang Ruan paused for a moment before she gently pushed aside Bai Ji, who was shielding her with half of her body. The little girl was surrounded by a group of people. Her face was extremely pale, and she was holding a silver ingot tightly in her hand. Her eyes were wide open, and she looked extremely helpless and weak. Then, she looked at the furious old man. He was wearing a brown linen cotton padded robe, and his beard was trembling in anger. His voice was extremely loud, and it was as if he was shouting at the little girl, "You little girl, you know how to steal chickens and dogs at such a young age. You have no manners at all." Gift? Lian Xiao looked at her curiously. To whom? What was important was not the truth, but the attitude of the people around him. Even if his young lady came forward to mediate, she would be treated as an ignorant outsider and be attacked together with him. Forget about the old man, he would just lose some face, but his young lady was the young lady of a noble family. Even if she was currently imprisoned in the manor, her status could not be changed. Everything in the world must have a principle of reinforcing and restraining each other. If there is yin, there must be yang. If there is bitterness, there must be sweetness. If there is a golden house, there will naturally be a golden house. The East Street was bustling and lively, while the West Street was dilapidated and deserted. Jiang Ruan lightly shook her head. "Baiji, get out of the way." As if completely unaffected by the atmosphere of the new year, the common people on the West Street wore thin coats and hurried to other places. They did not seem to be in the mood for the new year. Most of the people's faces were cold and numb. Compared to the pressing issues of food and clothing, the new year seemed to be less important. Only a few houses on the street had simple red Spring Festival couplets and old lanterns hanging on their doors, which gave them a vague feeling of the new year. However, there was a small peddler selling plum blossoms. On the stall were a few chipped porcelain vases with a few red plum blossoms that were about to wither. When he saw Jiang Ruan and the others, his eyes brightened and he hurriedly shouted, "Beautiful red plum blossoms. Young lady, please take one. It will look good in the room, and it will also smell good." Lian Xiao patted the shoulder of the person beside her and whispered a few words to him. Then, she turned to Jiang Ruan and said, "So this old master said that the young lady stole his silver." The young lady said that she did not steal it, and was so anxious that she started crying. Lian Xiao said, "This old master is really unlucky today. How pitiful." When the three of them entered the crowd, they could clearly see the situation inside. They saw two people confronting each other in the middle. One was an old man with white hair and a beard. At this moment, his face was flushed and his veins were bulging. He was unable to restrain his anger. On the other side, there was a 7 or 8-year-old girl with her head lowered and eyes brimming with tears. Besides, how can you prove that she stole your silver? That person was unforgiving, only a 7 or 8-year-old girl can steal your silver. Are you too careless, or is this girl very resourceful? TSK, maybe you deliberately wanted to cheat the young lady of her silver. Don't you think before you lie? Lian Xiao wanted to continue pressuring, but Jiang Ruan had already opened her mouth and said, "I want the rest." Jiang Ruan glanced at her. "Do you also think that he wanted to cheat people of their silver?" Bai Ji was stunned. Jiang Ruan had already taken a few steps forward and was exposed to the crowd. Bai Ji nodded slightly. As soon as she said this, the surrounding people immediately echoed, "Yes, yes, such a young lady, how could she have the ability to steal?" "You." The old man was so angry that he couldn't speak. "Of course not," Lian Xiao said, "you can deceive others, but you can't deceive me. In the past, when I was in the countryside, I have seen many of these crafty girls. They are obviously deceiving people. Baiji, am I right?" The surrounding people started to discuss, and without prior agreement, they all blamed the old man, as if he was the main culprit. The old man was so angry that his beard trembled, and his face was so red that it seemed as if blood could drip from it. However, he couldn't say a word, and could only gasp for breath with trembling lips. Baiji didn't say anything else. She poured out a large amount of copper from her close-fitting cloth bag and gave it to the peddler. The peddler also didn't expect to suddenly have such a business deal. Usually, the West Street was filled with poor people, and they wouldn't fork out money to buy flowers and grass. Today, it was an unexpected harvest. He simply put the porcelain bottle of red plums in Lian Xiao's hand. "It's the new year, and Miss also wants to have a good luck. Take this porcelain bottle as a gift." After saying this, he packed up his stall and left. The peddler spread out his palm, it's not expensive, just 5 copper coins. In reality, it was just as Lien Xiao had said, the little girl's deceit skills weren't that brilliant, and it wasn't that no one in the crowd could see through her tricks. It was just that the West Street, as a place where the poor gathered, was inherently very xenophobic and instinctively repelled outsiders. To the people here, this old man was nothing more than a stranger, and strangers should be suppressed. So today, the little girl was bound to win. The old man was also bound to be branded with the crime of cheating people of their silver. Bai Ji was stunned, and somewhat disagreed. "Miss, money is tight now." Chapter 7. In a situation where the situation was one-sided, someone suddenly spoke up for the old man. Naturally, everyone's eyes were focused on the speaker. Bai Ji and Lien Xiao hurriedly stood in front of Jiang Yuan, one behind her, to prevent anyone from bumping into her. Everyone's gazes had their own merits. Jiang Yuan did not hide and just stood where she was, allowing others to size her up. The old man was so angry that his face and neck were red. When he suddenly heard a comforting sentence, he felt that the voice was soft and gentle, containing a trace of refreshing coolness. Although it was winter, it was like the summer wind, sweeping away the impatience in one's heart. His heart actually calmed down slowly. Astonished, he, like everyone else, sized up the other person. Among the crowd, there was a little girl about 10 years old. Unlike her mature voice, she was extremely small. Although she was small, it was impossible to ignore her. This little girl's complexion was as pale as her lips, but her facial features were extremely delicate. She had a jade nose and cherry lips, and the most beautiful thing was her pair of long eyes under her black eyebrows. They were as moist as a mountain spring on one's knees, deep and shallow, directly impacting into one's heart. Her eyes were extremely pure, but the corners of her eyes were slightly raised. Unconsciously, there was a trace of charm. If she grew up and was properly nurtured, it would really be a shocking beauty. However, such a naturally charming little girl exuded an indescribable coldness. She just stood there quietly, but there was an indescribable feeling that made people unable to underestimate her, and even felt a trace of fear for no reason. The old man also frowned. A little girl like this actually had 2 servant girls by her side. If she was the young lady of a big family, her clothes were really too simple and crude. If she was the daughter of an ordinary family, this kind of style didn't seem like something that a small family could raise. Jiang Yuan stood there quietly. As the little girl watched, she suddenly burst into tears. As she sobbed, she said, I didn't steal the silver. Mother, I didn't steal the silver." Amidst the clamor, a peasant woman wearing a flowery gown squeezed out of the crowd. In 2 or 3 steps, she walked forward and shielded the little girl behind her. She looked at the old man and Jiang Yuan with hostility, and loudly said, "What do you want to do to my Qiao Jie? 2 people bullying one, the big bullying the small, don't you know shame?" Without waiting for Jiang Yuan to speak, Lien Xiao took the initiative to jump out and said with a smile, "This foreign, your words are wrong. Our miss only jumped out to speak a few words of fairness. How did she bully your daughter? So many people were watching, did our miss hit or scold her? Besides, I don't see how much older my daughter is compared to your daughter. Who would shout in public like your daughter? The strong are bullying the weak, and the many are bullying the few. Let's see who's bullying who." Pooh! That woman was also stunned. It seemed that she did not expect that the gentle and weak Lien Xiao would scold someone without panting. For a moment, she did not know how to respond. When she understood, she flew into a rage out of humiliation. She was about to continue when Jiang Yuan said, "It doesn't matter who's bullying who. What's important is the money, isn't it?" The woman turned her head and pulled the little girl into her arms. She said angrily, "Our Qiao Jie will not steal money. I gave her this money this morning when I left. So much money, yet Furen is at ease to hand it over to such a young child for safekeeping. Furen's magnanimity is admirable," Jiang Yuan said lightly. It was unknown whether it was intentional or not, but she emphasized the word young. Suddenly, there was a burst of laughter. This woman had just said that her daughter was young, yet she gave such a large sum of money to her. It was really a forced excuse. I let her go out to buy things. The woman was somewhat annoyed. What does Furin want to buy? So much money. If she wants to buy too many things, won't Xiao Jie be unable to move them? The laughter around them grew even louder. The woman became increasingly angry. Why do you care about this? I naturally have things that I want to buy. Now, I have already said that this money is for Xiao Jie. This old man says that it is his money. Is there any evidence or witnesses? None of the people around them spoke. There was really no evidence or witnesses. Even if it seemed that the reason for this matter could already be guessed, no one was willing to stick up for this old man. You are all in cahoots with each other, colluding with each other, villains colluding in evil. The old man was so angry that he stomped his feet. In one breath, he spat out quite a few words. Unfortunately, these genteel curses did not have the slightest effect on the people around him. Old sir, there is no need to be anxious, Jiang Ruan said. The old man turned to Jiang Ruan and frowned. In a stiff tone, he said, this old man does not want to implicate Mississippi. These people are trying to cover up the evidence of their crimes. This old man will fight them to the end. This old man appreciates Mrs. help today, but now you are like a clay bodhisattva crossing the river. It is better for you to protect yourself. When he said the word, miss, the old man was somewhat hesitant. It was really strange to call a little girl who could be his granddaughter miss. However, when facing this little girl, he felt as if he was facing an adult woman. He really could not treat her as an ordinary little girl. Old man, you really don't know what's good for you. My family's miss saved you, but you don't know how to appreciate kindness. When Lian Xiao heard this, she immediately said angrily. Lian Xiao, Jiang Ruan stopped her and said, Old sir is so sure that I am unable to protect myself? Could it be that you have another way? The old man raised his voice, attracting the gazes of the people around them. Old sir, first tell us how the money was lost. Jiang Ruan said. I did not steal his money, I did not steal his money. The little girl screamed and cried again. Shut up. Jiang Ruan glanced coldly at Xiao Jie, who was in the woman's embrace. Xiao Jie was unconsciously frightened by her cold gaze and immediately shut her mouth, shrinking into the woman's embrace. Everyone clicked their tongues in wonder. When the old man saw this, he thought for a moment and said, Today, when I first came here, I bought a deep-fried pancake at the corner of the street and grabbed some copper coins from my purse. After walking for a while, I felt that someone was touching my things, but when I saw that it was a little girl walking beside me, I became vigilant and went to check my purse. I discovered that the money had disappeared without a trace, so I grabbed her and really found the money on her body. Who knew that she would make a false accusation, really hateful. After saying this, he glared at the little girl, whose face was still full of tears. Where is the peddler who sells deep-fried pancakes? Jiang Ruan asked. It's me. A dark-skinned middle-aged man walked out and scratched his head. His gaze was somewhat evasive as he said, There are too many people who buy deep-fried pancakes, I can't remember. West Street was deserted, so these words were clearly perfunctory. When the little girl and the woman saw this, they looked at Jiang Ruan with schadenfreude. They only felt that Jiang Ruan would not be able to come up with any more tricks. Since both of you insist on your own words, Jiang Ruan said softly, then let the money speak. Chapter 8. Silver could speak. How could Silver speak? Her words were interesting, and the crowd turned to look at Jiang Ruan. The old man, who was stomping his feet in anger, also turned to look at Jiang Ruan in confusion. Bai Ji and Lian Xiao looked at each other, not knowing what Jiang Ruan was going to do. The woman almost laughed out loud, and said sarcastically, Little girl, are you talking nonsense? Could it be that you can make Silver speak? If you really have such an ability, quickly open everyone's eyes. If you are talking nonsense, don't let everyone laugh at you. Silver can naturally speak. Jiang Yuan said lightly, I will ask again, this madam, is the silver really yours? Of course I gave it to Sister Chow. The woman raised her head and said confidently. Good. Jiang Yuan said, Bai Ji, go find a basin of water. The surrounding people did not know what Jiang Yuan was planning, and a roadside vendor said, I have ready-made water here, I can lend it to Mississippi. Bai Ji brought the basin of water over and placed it neatly at Jiang Yuan's feet. Madam, please give me the silver. The woman looked at Jiang Yuan suspiciously, and the girl clutched the money pouch even tighter. If madam does not give me the silver, how can I ask the silver? Jiang Yuan said seriously. As soon as she said this, there was a burst of low laughter. There were more and more people watching the show, and now that this girl with an extraordinary temperament suddenly spoke like this, they could not help but feel pity. She looked like a smart girl, but unexpectedly, there was something wrong with her brain. Lian Xiao glared at the surrounding crowd, or perhaps it was the crowd's laughter that gave the woman confidence. She took the silver from the girl's hands and handed it to Jiang Yuan. Here, you have to ask clearly. Everyone, listen up. Among the people present, besides Jiang Yuan, only 3 people did not laugh. Needless to say, Lian Xiao and Bai Ji, the old man only frowned and carefully sized up Jiang Yuan's movements. Jiang Yuan held the silver in her palm, her face expressionless, but her voice was extremely gentle. She said, Silver, oh silver, please tell me, who is lying? The woman burst into laughter. Little girl, don't say that I told you about the silver. You're just fooling us. Don't treat us like fools. Jiang Yuan did not even spare her a glance. She let go of the silver in her hand and with a dong sound, the silver fell into the basin of water at her feet. The water rippled slightly. She said, Silver has spoken. What do you mean? The woman was getting impatient. There are so many pairs of ears. Are you the only one who can hear it? I didn't hear it, I saw it. Jiang Yuan stared at the water. A curious teenager in the crowd craned his neck and asked, Did it speak? No? Jiang Yuan countered with a question. Her small and thin body was wrapped in a large cotton-padded jacket. Although her posture was weak and frail, she appeared to be abnormally firm, as if there was nothing in the world that could shake her calmness and composure. The surrounding people did not know what was going on. They all looked at the basin, but they could not see anything. A moment later, someone exclaimed, Look! There's something in the water. On the clear surface of the water, a shallow layer of grease floated up. This golden grease was exceptionally conspicuous on the surface of the water. Jiang Yuan said, It's common for the old teacher to rub the vegetable oil on the silver after eating the deep-fried pancake. I just don't know how Madame managed to rub the grease on the silver. Could it be that Madame has only just remembered that she or Chow Jier also went to buy deep-fried pancakes? Her voice was flat and indifferent, but strangely, one could hear the cadence within it. With a single sentence, she had clearly explained the ins and outs of the matter, and at the same time, she had blocked any possible excuses that the woman might have. If the woman continued to argue, it would instead make people feel that she was trying to cover up something that only made things worse. So that's how it is. Someone sighed. This silver belongs to the old man because he bought deep-fried pancakes and smeared oil on them. Now, the silver can only be seen when it comes into contact with water. Isn't it just the silver that speaks? The crowd discussed spiritedly, and when they looked at Jiang Yuan, they all clicked their tongues in wonder. Such an exquisite and incisive mind, and at such a young age, it was really not worthy of praise. The old man had been watching Jiang Yuan's every move. Seeing that she had easily and effortlessly cleared his name, he was astonished and naturally overjoyed. The gaze he used to look at Jiang Yuan also softened a little. Unexpectedly, he did not have the stubbornness that previously rejected people 1,000 miles away. The woman who was carrying the little girl still wanted to argue, Your one-sided statement, old teacher. Jiang Yuan simply did not listen to the other's words. She turned to the old man and said, The matter is very simple. Since so many people are unable to make a decision for the old teacher, there is no need to waste time here. Why don't we go to the East Street District Magistrate's office and ask around? Perhaps there is someone who can make a decision for the old teacher. The person who could make a decision in the East Street District Magistrate's office was naturally the district magistrate. Since ancient times, the common people did not fight with the officials. Although the people of West Street were xenophobic and this concerned their own family's interests, no one was willing to wade into these muddy waters. The crowd that had originally gathered in a circle immediately dispersed. The woman saw that the situation was not good. Jiang Yuan had once again changed her previously gentle appearance, and her attitude had become unyielding. Knowing that there was no benefit in continuing to argue, she immediately picked up the little girl and said, "I will not argue with you people. Sister Qiao, let's go." After the woman left, Jiang Yuan took out the silver from the basin and handed it to the old man. The old man took the silver and looked at Jiang Yuan inquisitively. "Little girl is quite interesting. Which family's young miss are you from? Old teacher is also quite stubborn, but I do not know which family's Darren are you from?" Jiang Yuan said coldly. The old man stared blankly. He did not expect that the little girl who had always been helping him would suddenly treat him so coldly. He asked doubtfully, "Do you have any dissatisfaction with this old man?" "Yes," Jiang Yuan said. Seeing the old man stare blankly again, she then said indifferently, "When encountering such a matter, and the dispute cannot be resolved, old teacher should immediately report it to the authorities. Old teacher has also lived for a long time, so you should know that everything has its limits. If I had not come today, even if old teacher had argued here for a whole day, it is not certain that there would be a result. Who knows what kind of crime he would be accused of? You little girl," the old man stiffened his neck, "when I saw you lend a helping hand, I originally thought that you had some chivalrous spirit and courage. Who would have thought that you would be the same as the others? Right and wrong, black and white, naturally must be fought clearly. I am in the right, so I am not afraid of confronting them." Jiang Yuan thought for a moment, "That's right. Old teacher is already so old, yet still arguing with others on the street. Your strength of character is really admirable. Presumably, when you were young, you were also like this, not afraid of power and authority, and always argued when you encountered a problem." Her expression did not change, and her tone was gentle. For a moment, it was unknown whether her words were praise or derogatory. A treasured sword's edge is sharpened, and a plum blossom's fragrance comes from the bitter cold. Old teacher's strength of character is very similar to this red plum blossom. Baiji, by giving this red plum blossom to old teacher, it can also be considered as completing a portion of fate. Jiang Yuan smiled slightly. Chapter 9. On the way back, Lian Xiao tried to restrain herself, but in the end, she could not help but ask, "Why did Miss give the plum blossoms away? In any case, it was bought with silver. If you wanted to give it away, you should have left one in the room. Why did you just give it to a stranger? Lian Xiao, when did you know that I like plum blossoms? This Miss doesn't really like it." Lian Xiao shook her head. When Furin was alive, her Miss still liked flowers and grass. Ever since Furin passed away, her Miss's daily life had been very difficult. She was no longer in the mood for romance. "Since you don't like it, what's the use of keeping it?" Jiang Yuan said indifferently, "Why not do a favor at little cost and give it to someone else?" "But this favor is also done with silver." Lian Xiao was anxious and her words became nimble, "That old man is not related to us. What's in it for us to give it to him?" Jiang Yuan walked forward unhurriedly and said, "Of course there's a benefit. Everything in the world has a price. Today, I gave him a few red plums. In the future, the price he will have to pay will be much higher than the red plums. It's just that it's not visible yet." These words were unclear. Lian Xiao did not understand. Baiji followed behind in silence. Both of them were very confused. Baiji said, "Miss means that you will still see the old man in the future? But today, the red plum blossoms were bought in passing. If Miss already had an idea, how could you have predicted that the old man would appear and argue with someone?" I'm not a deity. How can I predict the future? Jiang Ruan said indifferently. Her tone was very light, but Bai Ji and Lian Xiao felt that there was an inexplicable coldness in her voice, which gave them goosebumps. When they finally returned to the residence without a hitch, they saw from afar a servant girl dressed in a green lined jacket. Her lips were smeared with bright red rouge. When she saw Jiang Ruan and the other two, she immediately cried out in an exaggerated manner, my miss, the weather is so cold and the ground is frozen, and your body is still ill. Why did you come out? Where did you go? I searched the entire residence but couldn't find you. Chunning, Lian Xiao put her hands on her hips and immediately replied, why are you shouting in broad daylight? Don't tell me that a lady needs to inform you before she goes somewhere. I'm just worried about Mississippi Miss has just recovered from her illness, and now it's the end of the year. What if something happens to her? Chunning wasn't a kind person either, and her tone was quite sarcastic. Baiji frowned, you know that Miss hasn't recovered yet. Why are you making such a loud noise? You're making Miss have a headache. Chunning pursed her lips and looked towards Jiang Ruan as she said, Miss, this servant has good intentions. Currently, Miss is still ill, so it's better for you to not walk around and not give the people outside a chance to make thoughtless remarks. Jiang Ruan looked at her quietly. Chunning and Xiao Yen were the same, both of them were the head maidservants of the imperial residence. Normally, their status in the imperial residence was also extremely high. Throughout the year, Xiao Yen was busy with matters outside the residence and had very few opportunities to meet with Jiang Ruan. On the other hand, Chunning was in charge of matters inside the residence and had a close relationship with Zhang Lan's family. Usually, she flattered Zhang Lan and often tripped up Jiang Ruan. Probably because she had received instructions from her superiors, Chunning did not have the slightest bit of respect in front of Jiang Ruan. She did not put Jiang Ruan in her eyes in the slightest, and she was even less respectful towards Jiang Ruan than she was towards Zhang Lan's family. Jiang Ruan remembered this Chunning very clearly. In her previous life, the rumors of her seducing Chen Zhao had spread very quickly, and Chunning had added fuel to the fire. She talked about it to the servants as if she had seen it with her own eyes. Because of this, the rumors had spread so quickly, and she had been destroyed so early. Chunning saw that Jiang Ruan had not said anything for a long time and looked towards her with some surprise. She met Jiang Ruan's gaze on her. That gaze was gentle, but inexplicably frightening, as if she was sizing up a toy that was about to be destroyed, indifferent and regretful. Miss? Chunning frowned. Who's the one making irresponsible remarks? Jiang Ruan looked at her and suddenly curled her lips into a gentle smile. Her smile was extremely slow, and the corners of her eyes lifted frivolously. It was as if she had become another person, and immediately, she appeared to be lively and fragrant. Chunning was only a woman, but that seductive charm had unexpectedly seduced her, and for a moment, she was unable to speak. The one making irresponsible remarks, it can't be you, right? The second half of Jiang Ruan's words pulled Chunning back from her thoughts. She stared blankly and subconsciously shook her head. Naturally, it's not this servant. Dogs are raised to bite outsiders, not to bite one's own people. If a dog is raised to make a ruckus when it sees one's own people, do you know what the outcome will be? Jiang Ruan asked her. Chunning shook her head. Naturally, it will be cooked into a delicious delicacy. Jiang Ruan said softly. The words delicious delicacy were spoken very slowly. Chunning stared at her in a daze. She only felt that this Jiang Ruan's fair skin was somewhat deathly pale under the sunlight, and her delicate and beautiful face also had some indescribable misery. Unconsciously, she took 2 steps back. Miss, Lan Momo is still waiting in the room. Both Bai Ji and Lian Xiao's expressions changed. A servant actually dared to use the 2 words waiting. There was really no sense of seniority. Zhang Lan's family's behavior was too rampant. Normally, they would outwardly comply but inwardly oppose. On the surface, they would pretend that no one could find any fault with them, but in private, they were extremely harsh towards Jiang Ruan. Waiting for me? Jiang Ruan slightly raised her head. Then let's go. don't let Lan Momo wait for too long. She stroked the toe-down loop buttons on her dark green cotton-padded jacket. In the room, two people were sitting in front of the brazier. A 12 or 13-year-old girl was nestled in the middle-aged woman's embrace. Her tone was rather harsh. This room is really cold, and there's even a smell. No wonder her body usually smells so bad. Fong her, don't talk nonsense, the woman reprimanded. In any case, she is the mistress. Don't go overboard on normal days and let others have something to use against you. Although she was reprimanding, her tone was full of love. The young girl sat up a little straighter. What kind of master is she? Look at how poor she is. Even the master doesn't care about her anymore. I know what to do. Mother, look at this golden hairpin on my head. Is it pretty? She tilted her head, revealing the golden hairpin inlaid with pearls and rice grains. This young girl's facial features were ordinary, and her skin was slightly dark. She wore a brand new peach-red silk jacket embroidered with peonies, a pinkish-purple horse-faced skirt, and a rouge-colored robe. On her waist, there was a long 5-colored pearl necklace. In her hair, there was a gold hairpin, earrings with 8 jewels, and a large gold necklace around her neck. Although she was only the daughter of a servant in the rural residence, her attire was comparable to that of many daughters of wealthy families. The quality is not bad, Fong looks really good wearing it, Zhang Lan exclaimed in admiration. Chen Fong smiled proudly and was about to say something when she heard a soft and gentle voice coming from outside. Lan Momo has been waiting in my room for so long. Is there something urgent? Chapter 10. Zhang Lan listened to Jiang Ruan's speech. At the beginning, she was listening very comfortably, but as she listened to the latter part, her expression changed. When Jiang Ruan finished, she immediately stood up and said, "Miss, what are you saying? Miss is the master, and this old servant is a servant. Miss, please don't make this old servant's life difficult. This old servant is very frightened. Father is busy with official business, so there is no need to write this year." Jiang Ruan looked at her fingertips. Lan Momo, I don't have any letters to bring. Chen Fong, who was at the side, could not guess what Zhang Lan was thinking. She only felt that this usually cowardly and easily bullied mistress seemed quite imposing today. Although none of the jewelry she was wearing today could compare to her, it was difficult to conceal her beauty. Her appearance was vivid and beautiful. She was instantly filled with jealousy. Without thinking, she opened her mouth and said, "Mrs. Body is completely healed, right? You can even walk around. I think you can start embroidering the handkerchief tomorrow. It should be done after the end of the year." Naturally, there was a way, but before he left, there was still a debt he had to collect. Zhang Lan looked at Jiang Ruan with some suspicion, but she could not see anything wrong with it. With great difficulty, she suppressed the uneasiness in her heart. No matter what, the more disheartened Jiang Ruan was, the easier it would be for her to explain herself to her superior, which was a good thing for her. He smiled and said, "If that's the case, this old servant will go and take care of the food. I'll take my leave." Lian Xiao's eyes were already spitting fire. Zhang Lan's words, on the surface, could not be faulted, but it was blatantly humiliating to Jiang Ruan. She was merely a servant, yet she was sitting while her mistress was standing. She really had no sense of hierarchy. Originally, Lian Xiao wanted to open her mouth to reprimand her, but when she saw the look in Jiang Ruan's eyes, she suddenly changed her mind. Like Bai Ji, she stood quietly by Jiang Ruan's side, not saying a word. As someone who had died once, she was able to see things more clearly than before. She would no longer place her hopes on the heartless and unjust Zhang Quan. Rather than sitting and waiting for death, she might as well take the initiative to attack. As for the letter, there was no need for it. Jiang Quan would not read it, and in the end, if it fell into the hands of Jiang Su Su and her mother, it would only serve as a joke. Zhang Lan abruptly returned to her senses. Even Chen Fong, who was at the side, was startled awake. She looked at Jiang Ruan with half jealousy and half anger. Zhang Lan suddenly regained her senses, and even Chen Fang, who was at the side, looked at Jiang Yuan with jealousy. Jiang Yuan smiled faintly. Momo is being too serious. Momo has devoted herself to the affairs of the rural residents, so naturally, Momo should have a good rest. Jiang Yuan has caused Momo to work so hard, and I feel very apologetic in my heart. Why not let Jiang Yuan massage Momo's legs? Perhaps Momo will feel more comfortable. Zhang Lan was startled for a moment, then smiled and said, "Look at this old servant's memory." This old servant wanted to ask young miss, "The farmstead is sending grain to your residence. Does young miss want to send a letter to master and madam?" Chen Fang and Zhang Lan were laughing. When they heard the words, they looked towards the door. They saw 3 silhouettes coming from the back of the light. The girl in the lead had a thin body wrapped in a loose cotton jacket, but strangely, she looked delicate. The sunlight made her pale skin look crystal clear, and it seemed that her facial features had become clearer overnight. Her eyes were no longer lifeless, and were still as calm as an ancient well. However, at the end of her eyes, there was a trace of indescribable charm. Her eyes were like flowing spring water, no longer wooden, but only bewitchingly quick-witted. She raised her eyebrows, and her voice was light and pleasant to listen to, with a hint of coolness. "Lan Momo?" Zhang Lan was stunned. Every year, Jiang Yuan would write a letter to bring back. Whether these letters were effective or not, the servants were well aware. However, no one would take the initiative to give up their hope. Now, Jiang Yuan no longer brought any letters back. Was she really disheartened and no longer had any hope? Jiang Yuan smiled faintly, "Of course." When Jiang Yuan was first sent to the residence, Zhang Lan only said that this place was not as prosperous and comfortable as the capital. Many things needed to be done by hand. Jiang Yuan did not need to chop firewood, but Bai Ji and Lian Xiao had been enslaved a lot. The 2 girls were still young, but their hands were already full of calluses. Jiang Yuan herself was not much better. She did not need to do farm work, but she still had to do embroidery. Every month, she had to hand over 20 square embroidered handkerchiefs to the residents to pay for her expenses. 20 square embroidered handkerchiefs was not a lot. Lian Xiao and Bai Ji also helped to make some, and it was barely enough. However, the patterns were complicated, and the embroidery method was complicated. Especially at the critical juncture of the new year, when 20 square became 30 square, it was difficult to support. Jiang Yuan raised her eyebrows. "Lan Momo, today's important matter is the embroidery?" Chen Fang wanted to make things difficult for Jiang Yuan, but she did not expect the other party to agree so easily. She gritted her teeth and said, "Then miss will have to work hard. If you are careful, you will not be able to embroider it and cause trouble." Jiang Yuan stretched out her hand and slowly stroked the edge of the bronze mirror. She smiled faintly. "Go back." Lian Xiao's eyes brightened. "Has Miss thought of a way to go back?" Jiang Yuan glanced at Zhang Lan, and there was a hint of surprise in her tone. "Momo can actually stand up." Seeing that Momo is fine, Jiang Yuan can rest assured. Otherwise, if something had happened to Momo, Jiang Yuan would really not know what to do. "Miss is here." Although Zhang Lan said so, her body did not move at all. She only tapped her thigh tiredly and said, "Today, with great difficulty, the chores in the residence have been settled and some time has been freed up. I wanted to visit Miss, but Miss is not here. I looked everywhere and instead sprained my ankle, so I decided to rest in the house. Miss, please forgive this old servant's rudeness. Days are very precious. How can I have the leisure to be angry with him?" Jiang Yuan sat down in front of the table and looked at the pale young girl's face in the rusty bronze mirror. "Since we are going back, why send a letter? If you have something to say, just say it in person." After Zhang Lan and Chen Fang left, Bai Ji asked in puzzlement, "Why did Miss not send a letter? Could it be that you are angry with Master?" Zhang Lan was secretly hating in her heart. Jiang Yuan's words just now were obviously to give her face, but if the latter words were to spread, she would not be able to bear the consequences. In this world, there was no reason for a master to massage the legs of a servant. Even if the person above had given a hint, if such a thing were to spread, It would only be said that she was a great servant who bullied the master and brought shame to the Shangshu Fu. The best way was to make it clear that there was no fault to be found, but at the same time, make things difficult for the other party. She did not expect that after hunting geese all her life, today, she would be pecked in the eye by a young goose using the same method. Thinking of this, Zhang Lan looked at Jiang Ruan again. Jiang Ruan only had a faint smile on her face and stood quietly in the same place. Unexpectedly, there was a feeling that she could not be seen through. A trace of fear immediately surfaced in Zhang Lan's heart. The other party was only a little over 10 years old, how could she make her feel fear? Was it a demon? Letter? Jiang Ruan's fingertips moved slightly. It had been so long that she had almost forgotten. During the few years she had stayed in the rural residence, every year at the end of the year, she would write letters to Jiang Quan and her eldest brother, hoping that they would take her back. Year after year, the letters had sunk into the sea, and there was no reply. What she waited for was the grievous news that her eldest brother, Jiang Xing, had died on the battlefield. After her eldest brother's death, there was no longer any hope for her life. Chapter 11. Early in the morning, the air in the rural residence was excellent. Gray-winged sparrows stood on the branches and pecked at their food. It had just snowed the night before, so the sunlight was even clearer. The vegetation was covered with a thick layer of snow, and the atmosphere of the new year was very strong. Jiang Ruan woke up early in the morning. After a simple breakfast, she and Lian Xiao went to the pear orchard for a stroll. It was not yet time for the pear orchard to bloom, but the branches were luxuriant with leaves. Lian Xiao felt a little regretful, it's not time yet. If the weather gets warmer, the pear blossoms will all bloom. That would be nice. Jiang Ruan smiled faintly. The flowers and grass were nothing more than competing for a beautiful color. In her previous life, she had also seen trees full of pear blossoms in the palace. Suddenly, it was as if the spring breeze had blown all the flowers open. Not only pear blossoms, but there were also peonies, water lilies, hibiscus, Chinese roses. The palace was full of flowers, but unfortunately, only one person could enjoy all the scenery. Later, she thought that there was someone else who could watch the flowers bloom and fade with her. Only when she died did she discover that it was just an illusion. The flowers were just like her life. They looked bright and beautiful, but when they decayed, there was no place for them to live. They fell to the ground and turned to dust. The only faint fragrance they had left was also bitter. Lian Xiao noticed that Jiang Ruan's gaze was somewhat deep. She did not know what she was thinking, but her expression was sad and cold. She was startled and asked with concern, "Miss?" Jiang Ruan returned to her senses and shook her head, "It's nothing, let's go." As the two walked and stopped, they did not notice that in the dense forest behind them, there was someone who had been standing for a long time. That person was dressed in a lake green silk robe with golden edges, a vest made of multicolored jade, and a pair of sky blue boots. He was dressed in a luxurious manner. His gaze was fixed on Jiang Ruan's figure, full of infatuation. This person was the youngest son of Zhang Lan's family, Chen Zhao. Chen Zhao usually liked to sleep under the pear orchard. Today was the same as usual. When he suddenly heard a woman's voice, it was no different from a cat seeing a fishy fish. He immediately looked towards the source of the voice and was stunned when he saw who it was. Jiang Ruan was dressed the same as yesterday, except that Bai Ji did not comb her hair into a bun. She had tied a small part of her hair into a hibiscus bun at the back of her head, and the rest was casually draped over her shoulders. This made her appear a little older, and actually had a more beautiful flavor. The pear blossoms in the pear orchard had not yet bloomed, but a layer of snow had accumulated on the branches, as if they were blooming pear blossoms. However, her skin was whiter than the white snow, and her face was brighter than the pear blossoms. Her expression was cold, but her eyes seemed to casually sweep across the bushes and branches. It was like a pool of clear spring water gently rippling through one's heart, making one's heart itch. Her voice was too far away, and he could not hear it clearly, but he could imagine that crisp and moving voice. She slightly raised her head to look at the ice crystals hanging on the branches, and her exposed neck was as graceful as a swan's. Chen Zhao swallowed his saliva, and his gaze fell on Jiang Ruan's slender figure in the distance. The cotton robe was too loose, and it concealed her slim waist. Although she was young, and looked like a young girl, she had a lively and fragrant liveliness. It was as if the charm of a mature woman and the tenderness of a young girl were all displayed on her. He had not realized before that Jiang Ruan, after a serious illness, had such beauty. She was really a natural stunner. If he could own such a stunner and go crazy with her every night, it would really be a wonderful thing in the world. Chen Zhao's expression was uncertain, and it was unknown what he was thinking about. He stood there, deep in thought. Not far away, Lian Xiao also noticed Chen Zhao's silhouette, and her face darkened. "Miss, let's go back early. There are unclean people in this garden. Be careful, and don't get into trouble." Jiang Ruan followed her gaze, and her lips curled into a light smile. "Okay." Chen Zhao was staring at Jiang Ruan in a daze. Unexpectedly, he saw the little beauty smile at him. This smile contained an indescribable meaning. It was not like the naivety or shyness that a little girl should have. There was only a kind of faint temptation, like an epiphyllum that contained a faint cold fragrance. It was momentarily aloof, but also contained the charm of the night. Chen Zhao could not help but be infatuated. Until Jiang Ruan and Lian Xiao left the pear orchard, he did not recover from the amazement of that smile. Very quickly, Jiang Ruan and Lian Xiao put this matter to the back of their minds. 3 days passed peacefully. During these 3 days, Jiang Ruan would casually walk around the Zhuangzi. Occasionally, she would also run into Chen Zhao. Unexpectedly, Chen Zhao was much more well-behaved than before. He did not stick to her like a housefly like before. Only then did Lian Xiao feel more at ease. However, there was also a worrisome matter. Seeing that the day of handing over the embroidered handkerchief was approaching, Jiang Ruan's handkerchief had not been embroidered. After Jiang Ruan fell into the water, Zhang Lan temporarily did not mention the matter of embroidering the handkerchief. She only wanted to slow down and embroider it again. A few days ago, Chen Fang deliberately brought it up, which made things difficult for Lian Xiao and Bai Ji. Now that Jiang Ruan's health had not fully recovered, the two of them naturally could not let Jiang Ruan do this. It was fine if Jiang Ruan did not embroider herself, but she did not allow the two of them to embroider with her. "Miss," Lian Xiao disapprovingly looked at Jiang Ruan, who was leaning against the window and reading a book. "The embroidered handkerchief is about to be handed over. Why is Miss still so relaxed?" "Don't worry," Jiang Ruan flipped a page. "How can I not worry?" Lian Xiao said with a bitter face. "If the embroidered handkerchief is not handed over, those people will find an excuse to be harsh on Mrs. Expenses." Jiang Ruan sighed and closed the page in her hands. When she first came to the rural residence, she brought 3 chests. One contained clothes and utensils, one contained silver jewelry, and the last one contained books. These were all things that her mother had left for her. Initially, she had thought that she would keep them by her side, but she had entered a tiger's den. Zhang Lan's family was greedy and unkind, stealing openly and secretly robbing. In the end, the only thing that was not taken away was this chest of books. Before the distribution date, we should return to the Fu. Jiang Ruan caressed the large characters on the cover of the book. "Don't worry." Lian Xiao frowned and wanted to say something, but she saw Bai Ji push open the door and walk in. Miss Fang is here." Lian Xiao was stunned. A pink figure appeared behind Bai Ji. Chen Fang smiled and greeted Mississippi. Today, she was wearing a pink jacket embroidered with butterflies, a small pink skirt of the same color, and a pair of red leather boots. Her hair was combed into an exquisite cloud bun, and on her ears were heavy golden wing carved flower earrings. In her hair, there was a gold silk hairpin. Lian Xiao sneered and looked at Chen Fang with a gaze full of disdain. From head to toe, everything on her was Jiang Ruan's things. To think that she could put down her pride and openly wear these things on her body in front of her master. She was indeed worthy of the word bandit. Jiang Yuan reached out to support her chin and smiled faintly. The bandits were fearless and had become more and more rampant in recent days. But it didn't matter. Since they were here to collect their debts, they would definitely spit out everything that was hers without leaving a single drop behind. Chapter 12. Jiang Yuan picked up the teacup on the table and took a sip before looking at Chen Fang. Chen Fang bit her lip tightly. She had long been accustomed to Jiang Yuan's despondent and gloomy demeanor during the years she had spent in the manor. Who would have thought that after falling into the water, Jiang Yuan would seem to have changed into a completely different person? She was like a slowly withering flower that had suddenly gained infinite vitality and began to bloom once again. Jiang Yuan's temperament was unfamiliar to Chen Fang. This official's daughter's every move was full of beauty, as if she was used to a pampered life. She had a kind of nobility. Chen Fang naturally did not know that after Jiang Yuan was sent to the palace in her past life, there was no lack of conspiracy in the palace. If she was not careful, she would be caught red-handed. She could not make a single mistake in her behavior. The rules in the palace were very strict. The etiquette instructor had trained her to the point of perfection. Living in the palace all year round, her noble temperament had naturally developed. This kind of etiquette was nothing special when it came to the beauties of the palace, but when it came to a young and downtrodden lady who had lived in the countryside all year round, there was a kind of unsullied demeanor that came out of the mud. "What's the matter?" Jiang Yuan asked. This kind of attitude was like a master talking to her servant. Chen Fang's face flashed a trace of resentment, but she suppressed it. Touching her hairpin, she smiled and said, "Miss, a few days ago, a pot of beauty under the moon was sent. It has been growing well. These days, the flower buds have grown bigger and bigger. It seems that it will bloom tonight. If Miss is interested, why don't you go take a look?" Beauty under the moon. Jiang Yuan muttered, "This season does not seem to be the season for it to bloom." Chen Fang quickly said, "That's right. Usually, beauty under the moon only blooms in summer or autumn. This pot blooms early in the morning. It is very rare. Miss, why don't you go take a look?" Without waiting for Jiang Yuan to open her mouth, Lian Qiao said, "It's late at night and it's freezing outside. How can we let Miss walk around? What if she gets cold? Miss's body can't withstand the torment." Bai Ji also said, "It's better to put beauty under the moon in the room. Miss can look at it from there." Chen Fang frowned. Beauty under the moonlight, as the name suggests, is only interesting under the moonlight. If you look at it indoors, it's just like any other flower. What's the point? What's more, this beauty under the moonlight has already been recorded in the account book. If you want to move it, this servant can't make the decision." Lian Qiao was about to speak again when Jiang Yuan smiled faintly, "Since that's the case, let's go take a look tonight." "Miss," Bai Ji dissuaded her, "it's too cold outside, it will be troublesome if you freeze your body." Chen Fang covered her mouth and laughed, "Sister Bai Ji, Sister Lian Qiao, Miss has already agreed. What are you still talking about? As servants, the most important thing is to listen to the master's orders. How can you casually make decisions for Miss? Isn't that bullying her?" These words were so hurtful that Lian Qiao and Bai Ji's expressions changed. Jiang Yuan put down her teacup and slowly said, "What Fang Er said is correct. However, it is fine for me to discipline my own people. Fang, on the other hand, has exceeded my expectations. I didn't expect that you would also like to admire flowers under the moonlight." Chen Fang stroked a lock of hair that was hanging in front of her chest. "Although this servant grew up in a manor, I also like to read poems. Admiring flowers under the moonlight is an elegant matter, this servant also likes it very much." After thinking for a while, Chen Fang added, "Oh right, tonight at midnight, Miss must go to the pear garden as promised. The beauty under the moonlight is displayed at the entrance of the pear garden. This servant will also be there at that time." "I know." Jiang Yuan nodded. Chen Fang heaved a sigh of relief. "This servant will take her leave now. Miss, please don't forget." After she finished speaking, she looked around the room again before leaving happily. After Chen Fong left, Lian Xiao angrily said, "What kind of plaything is this? Elegant? Pay!" She thinks that just because she wears someone else's clothes, she really thinks she's the master. She should take a piss and look at herself in the mirror. How shameless. Bai Ji looked at Jiang Ruan worriedly. "Miss, do you really want to go to the pear garden?" "Miss, this servant has something to say." Chen Fong is a sharp and unkind person. It is very unusual for her to express goodwill like this. Be careful that she has other intentions. Jiang Ruan smiled faintly. Bai Ji and Lian Xiao were two servant girls. In her previous life, before she entered the palace, Lian Xiao had been beaten to death because she spoke rudely to Jiang Quan. In fact, it was only because Lian Xiao was unwilling to replace Jiang Su Su to enter the palace and pleaded with Jiang Quan. She did not know why, but she angered Jiang Quan and ended up with a tragic death. In the end, it was all to protect her own heart. Although Lian Xiao was bold and straightforward, she had a sense of propriety. Jiang Su Su and her daughter probably contributed to Jiang Quan's rage. Bai Ji had accompanied her safely into the palace. Jiang Su Su and her daughter must have seen that Bai Ji's temperament was gentle and would not cause any waves, so they were assured to let her accompany her. When she was forced to abdicate, she let Bai Ji escape with Pei was eventually caught, so it was likely that Bai Ji had also met with misfortune. These two servant girls had accompanied her for a short and tragic life. They had done their best to accompany her, but she had not protected either of them. Just like Pei, an eldest brother. Seeing that Jiang Ruan did not answer, Bai Ji and Lian Xiao looked at her with some doubt. They were shocked by the coldness in her eyes. Just as they were about to say something, Jiang Ruan smiled. The coldness from before was swept away in an instant. "I know. You know that she is up to no good, but you still want to go?" Lian Xiao asked. "It's too risky. This promise must be fulfilled." Jiang Ruan said, "But it's not to admire the flowers, it's just to collect a debt." "Collect a debt?" Lian Xiao was even more confused. "Lian Xiao, there's something I need you to do." Jiang Ruan instructed Lian Xiao to lean over and whisper softly. After Chen Fong left Jiang Ruan's room, she happily walked forward. When she walked out of the courtyard, the people outside saw her and quickly went forward to ask, "How was it? Did she agree?" Of course she agreed. Chen Fong pursed her lips. Now that she's in such dire straits, she naturally would not let go of this opportunity when I mentioned the beauty under the moonlight. "Brother, where's the thing you promised me?" Chen Zhao grinned happily and took out a sparkling and translucent jade bracelet from his bosom. "Good sister, I didn't dote on you in vain. After the matter is settled, I will definitely thank you properly." Chen Fong impatiently took the bracelet from Chen Zhao's hand and put it on. Satisfied, she said, "The quality is not bad." Then she thought of something and glared at Chen Zhao. "You really like her? What's so good about that foxy woman? Master doesn't like her, she has no future." "Sigh, I'm not going to marry her," Chen Zhao said happily. "With such a beautiful concubine at home, I won't have to visit the brothels in the future. Wouldn't that save me a lot of money? I've never tasted the taste of an official's daughter. Although she's in dire straits, she's still delicate. Cough, I won't talk about this with you anymore. I'll leave first, remember to keep it a secret. I can't be bothered with you." Chen Fong lightly snorted and walked away. Chapter 13. While the sun was shining brightly in the afternoon, Lian Xiao took the blankets from the house to the courtyard outside to dry them. The cotton in the old blankets was thin, almost a thin layer. It was extremely eye-catching among the thick and colorful blankets in the courtyard. Chunning was instructing a few servant girls to hang the quilts in Zhang Lan's room on a rope outside. Compared to the ones in Lian Xiao's hands, the quilt in front of Chunning was embroidered with delicate peony patterns. It was stuffed with this year's newly plucked cotton, bulging and looked very thick. The quilt pressed down on the rope that was used to dry the clothes. Chunning said loudly, be careful, don't scratch the back, it is made of fine silk. Lian Xiao did not even look at her and walked to the other side. She raised her hand and hung the quilt on the rope. The quilt was light and weightless, so it was very easy to hang. Chunning saw Lian Xiao and laughed. Oh, Lian Xiao Jijia also came to dry the quilt personally. After saying that, he glanced at the quilt on the rope and said, all of you come and learn from her. Look at Lian Xiao. She's really capable. She can dry the quilt by herself and it doesn't look like much effort. Unlike us, it's tiring to carry it with a few people. The maidservants giggled. One of them smiled and said, perhaps the quilt in young Mrs. Room is made of high-quality cotton. It doesn't look like it has any weight. This kind of quilt is very comfortable. It's not like our quilt, which is thick and heavy. Lian Xiao smoothed out the wrinkles on the quilt and ignored their teasing. Seeing this, Chunning did not give up and continued, Lian Xiao, why did you only son Mrs. Quilt and not Baiji's quilt? Let us see if your quilt is the same as Mrs. and different from ours. A few servant girls laughed again. It was really too much to say that a mistress quilt could not even be compared to a servant's. Lian Xiao raised her eyebrows and was about to get angry when she saw a servant girl with a sweet smile walking over hurriedly. Lian Xiao Jijia, you asked me to find. Lu Zhu, Lian Xiao interrupted her, wait a moment. She smoothed out the last wrinkle on the blanket before turning around and pulling the young servant girl's hand, come over and talk. The two of them walked to the side and leaned very close to each other, not knowing what they were talking about. After a while, Lian Xiao picked up the empty wooden basin and left. After Lian Xiao left, Chunning called out to the young servant girl who was about to leave, your name is Lu Zhu, right? Dewdrop timidly looked at Chunning and said, yes. Don't be afraid, Chunning said, what were you and Lian Xiao talking about just now? No, nothing. Dewdrop shook her head and looked down at her feet. What's there to be afraid of? It's not like I'm going to eat you up. Chun Ying's voice was a little fierce. Why would Lian Xiao look for you for no reason? And what were the two of you discussing so sneakily just now? I'm sure you know who's in charge here. If you don't explain yourself today, then don't stay in the manor anymore. Don't, Dewdrop suddenly raised her head, a pair of helpless red eyes, Sister Chunning, don't chase me out of the manor. As long as you explain yourself, I naturally won't do anything to you, Chunning said. I'm not an unreasonable person. Seeing that you look unfamiliar, you should be a new servant girl. Work well and I won't let anyone bully you in the future. Really? Dewdrop raised her head, a hopeful expression on her face. Why would I lie to you? Chun Ying's tone became gentler, but she was sure that there was something fishy about Lian Xiao. Actually, Sister Lian Xiao did not look for me for anything, Dewdrop said, she only heard that I'm good at embroidery. She wanted me to embroider a water lily on the torn part of Mrs. Clothes so that she wouldn't be able to tell. Chunning looked at her suspiciously, just this? Yes. Dewdrop nodded. This is really strange. Miss usually doesn't care about clothes. Why would she suddenly want to embroider a water lily? This. Dewdrop was a little hesitant. What else is there? Chunning asked anxiously. I heard that a pot of beauty under the moonlight was found outside. Tonight, Miss wants to go to the pear garden to admire the flowers. If you want to dress nicely, don't neglect the precious flowers. Dewdrop said everything in one go. I heard that beauty under the moonlight is extremely rare. It's also a rare species that can bloom on a winter night. Beauty under the moonlight? Chunning felt strange. A pot of beauty under the moonlight was found in the manor? I've never heard of this. She looked at Chunning in front of her. All right, there's nothing else. You can go and do your work. Dewdrop responded and turned to leave. After Dewdrop left, Chunning stood at the same spot and muttered to herself, now that it's already like this, why would she still have the mood to admire the flowers? Even if she had the mood to admire the flowers, why would she specially look for a nice dress? Usually, she cares about these things the most. There must be another reason for her abnormal behavior today. I must find out what exactly they are planning. In the room in the side courtyard, Baiji was also taking out the books from the chest to dry. The chest full of books was spread out in the courtyard to dry. As Baiji carefully flipped through the pages, she said, "Miss, this chest of books has been well preserved. After the new year, the room will be damp, so you must often take them out to dry." She then thought of something. In the past, when Furin was still alive, she was also extremely fond of books and would dry them every day. Mother came from a family of generals, yet she collected all these precious reading materials. It was only to coax people into liking them, but it ended up benefiting me. Jiang Ruan said softly as she looked at the books in the courtyard. The ancestors of the Zhao family were generals who were accustomed to the sandstorms and bloody battlefields. The men in the family were all heroes in the army. Their only daughter, Zhao Mei, fell in love with Jiang Quan. The entire Zhao family strongly opposed this, but Zhao Mei insisted on marrying a man of lower status. Thus, the Zhao family severed all ties with their only daughter. After Jiang Quan and Zhao Mei got married, Zhao Mei found out that Jiang Quan favored erudite and talented women. Thus, she collected many unique books from all over the world and carefully studied them. Who knew that not long after, Zhao Quan would marry the most talented woman in the capital, Xia Yan, as a noble concubine. In the end, Zhao Mei did not live to finish reading this chest of books. However, Xia Yan had transformed from a noble concubine into the present Jiang Furen. Jiang Ruan laughed at herself. Even in death, her mother did not understand that if one really did not love, one would not be able to gain the other's favor no matter what. From the past until the future, the one Jiang Ruan loved was never the talented woman, but the talented woman, Xia Yan. "Miss, are you thinking of Furen?" Baiji looked at Jiang Ruan's expression. If Furen was still alive, she would definitely be gratified to see Mrs. current intelligence and sensitivity. Jiang Ruan smiled slightly and declined to comment. Baiji walked back and saw the book in Jiang Ruan's hand. She was stunned. "Miss, why are you reading military books again? Now that you don't have to go to the battlefield, why don't you read some poetry? Even if I don't go to the battlefield, the enemy will still come knocking on my door." Jiang Ruan's gaze fell on a few words in the book of military strategy in front of her. "Lure the snake out of its hole." Chapter 14. Winter passed very peacefully. The lively places became livelier, and the deserted places became even more deserted. No one came to visit Jiang Ruan's courtyard, and the three of them had a rare period of leisure. The morning air was fresh. Baiji and Lian Xiao were sitting at the doorway mending their clothes. Their clothes were so old that they couldn't be any older. Even though the two of them had outstanding embroidery skills and could still wear their clothes even if they used flower and grass embroidery, bright-colored silk threads were still extremely precious to them. Normally, they wouldn't use such exquisite patching. The girl sat quietly in front of the window, seriously reading the book in front of her. The sunlight shone on the side of her pretty face, and her eyelashes, which were as long as butterfly wings, gently trembled. Her eyes were pure and beautiful, and there was a softness that made people feel pity for her. Lian Xiao inadvertently turned around and was somewhat lost in thought. She thought that her miss was really a rare beauty. When she was quiet, she was clear and gentle, like a tranquil landscape painting, but when she was angry, she had a fierce charm. As the saying goes, quiet as a virgin, quick as a rabbit, it should be used to describe a woman like Jiang Ruan. Baiji saw that Lian Xiao was lost in thought, and also turned around to look. She said thoughtfully, "Miss is now a little older, and you have grown taller. The clothes you used to wear are a little difficult. It is almost spring, let's find some time to make 2 new clothes for Miss to wear." It is easy to say. Lian Xiao returned to her senses and continued to sew the buttons of the clothes in front of her. "The allowance given to us at the end of the year has been reduced by half. 2 new clothes will also require a lot of material. Where can we find it? I think we should go to the mountains and pick some herbs to exchange for some money, and save it to buy cloth for Mississippi." He paused for a moment before continuing, "Our Miss is so beautiful, but the clothes she wears are all old and wrinkled. At her age, other girls are dressed like flowers, but our Miss doesn't even have a single piece of bright clothing. What a waste of good looks. If our miss were to wear those beautiful clothes, wouldn't all the girls in the capital lose out? Bai Ji could not help but laugh at Lien Xiao's words. You only know how to talk about the capital, I don't know when we can return to the Fu. Once the topic of returning to the Fu was mentioned, both of their spirits dissipated. After a while, Lien Xiao shook her head. Don't think so much, didn't Miss say that we can return after the end of the year? I think the young lady already has an idea. We don't have to worry. Bai Ji nodded her head. Miss is smart, but don't make any mistakes. While they were chatting, someone knocked on the door from outside. It was the servant girl Xiao Yuan who came to deliver firewood. The manor didn't give them charcoal, but firewood. It was obvious who had instructed her to do this. Every winter was the most difficult time for the three of them. Unfortunately, they were given a limited amount of firewood. Zhang Lan was really not afraid that the three of them would freeze to death. After Xiao Yuan greeted Jiang Yuan, she picked out the firewood from the basket. Her movements were also nimble, and Lien Xiao helped by her side. After she was done, Xiao Yuan glanced at the clothes in Bai Ji's hands and smiled. Bai Ji Jiejie's hands are really deft. The stitches are fine and firm, and it cannot be seen from the outside at all. Bai Ji smiled. It's just sewing for fun. Who would notice it when I wear it? Bai Ji Jiejie is wrong. Xiao Yuan shook her head. This year, mother made a new peach red short jacket for me. I didn't want to tear a hole under my arm when I was working. I wanted to mend it, but it's not easy to mend that area. If I'm not careful, it will be seen. It's very troublesome. If I had Jiejie's skills, I wouldn't have to worry. What's so difficult about that? Lien Xiao returned the basket to Xiao Yuan. Let Bai Ji mend it for you. Really? Xiao Yuan looked at Bai Ji in surprise, her eyes filled with undisguised anticipation. Bai Ji smiled and nodded. Of course you can, but I don't have peach-colored silk thread here. You have to send the silk thread over. No problem, thank you Bai Ji Jiejie. You are such a good person. Hearing this, Xiao Yuan immediately smiled. If I knew Bai Ji Jiejie was so easy to talk to, I would have come here more often. I have a pile of torn and messily sewn clothes at my place. You little girl, Lien Xiao pretended to be angry, you only know how to take advantage of us. Who doesn't know that the maids you serve outside are clean and tidy? How would they have any torn and tattered clothes? Who said clean and tidy? Xiao Yuan pouted. Even though it's a little cold here, I would rather serve someone with a good temper like Mississippi. To tell you the truth, the maids outside are really hard to serve. Not to mention Lan Momo, even her youngest son is not easy to deal with. It's fine if he messes around on normal days, but recently he has gone overboard. I heard that he sold a piece of land in the house behind Lan Momo's back. When Lan Momo found out about this last night, she flew into a rage. These few days, us maids have been keeping a low profile, afraid of offending her. Oh? Is that true? Bai Ji winked at Lien Xiao. Even though this Qin Zhao likes to mess around, he is not very generous. Why would he sell a piece of land? That's right, Lien Xiao said. Are you lying to us? There's no such thing. Xiao Yuan waved her hands repeatedly. All of us maids who are in charge of purchasing outside know about this. That day, Lan Mama was so angry that she didn't even know where the money went. She turned his room upside down. Can you guess what the result was? Not a single coin. Ah, Lien Xiao exclaimed, that's really strange. A piece of land can be exchanged for a lot of money. It can't be that he spent it all in just a few days. Could it be that the money flew away on its own? Lan Momo is also very strange, but that person didn't know anything. In the end, he had a big fight with Lan Momo and actually left, Xiao Yuan said. The three of them talked about this matter and had their own opinions on Qin Zhao's conjecture. Seeing that it was getting late, Xiao Yuan wanted to get up and leave. Lien Xiao sent her to the entrance of the courtyard. Bai Ji put down the clothes in her hands and walked to the side of Jiang Yuan, who was reading a book. Jiang Yuan raised her head and said with a smile that was not a smile, He's actually quite daring to sell the land just like that. Miss, Baiji said, although this servant doesn't know what happened, I feel that this matter of selling the land was facilitated by Mississippi. My heart is full of doubts, but this servant is stupid and can't figure it out no matter how hard I try. Can't figure it out? Jiang Ruan said, it's very simple. Before she finished speaking, Lian Xiao's loud voice could be heard from outside, why are you rushing in? Don't you have any manners? On the other side, an angry voice could be heard, don't block the way, let me in. Baiji could not help but be stunned. That voice was very familiar, it was Chen Fang. But what was Chen Fang doing here? Jiang Ruan spread her hands, look, you'll understand very soon. Chapter 15. The door was slammed open with a pa-ta sound. Chen Fang appeared in front of Jiang Ruan, followed closely by a flustered and exasperated Lian Xiao. Both of their clothes were in a mess, presumably, they had just torn each other apart. Jiang Ruan did not even spare a glance at Chen Fang. Her gaze was still fixed on the page in front of her. Baiji was standing by the side, carefully blowing on the hot tea for her to cool down. Lian Xiao did not say a word after entering the room. She walked in front of Jiang Ruan in a well-behaved manner and lowered her head. In this way, Chen Fang was left to the side, and no one paid any attention to her. Chen Fang was anxious. Initially, she wanted to keep her cool and wait for Jiang Ruan to inquire first, but she did not expect that Jiang Ruan would not raise her head to look at her. Chen Fang's heart began to beat like a drum. This kind of attitude made her feel uncertain, and the atmosphere was unusually heavy. At the end of the day, Chen Fang was still a teenage girl who did not know how to restrain her emotions. Chen Fang tried to restrain herself, but she still said angrily, Miss, I have a question. Jiang Ruan did not even lift her eyelids as she lazily said, ask away. Chen Fang stared blankly. Jiang Ruan's attitude made her feel annoyed. Thinking of the reason for her visit today, her anger flared up, Miss, a few days ago, did you not go to see that pot of beauty under the moon? That's right, Jiang Ruan listened to his words and thought for a moment before replying, that night, I suddenly felt a little unwell, so I didn't go to admire the flowers. Miss, how can you do this? Chen Fang's anger grew, you clearly made an appointment with this servant. If you don't want to go, you should at least send someone to inform this servant. Ah! Jiang Ruan looked at her with slight astonishment, no one told you. Lian Xiao, didn't I instruct you to tell Fanger that I'm not going? Could it be that you're too playful and forgot what I told you to do? Lian Xiao curtsied, no matter what, this servant will not dare to forget Mrs. instructions. That night, this servant went to the pear garden. Originally, I wanted to wait for Fanger to come and tell her about this matter. Who knew that after waiting for a long time, Fanger still did not come? This servant thought that Fanger already knew about this matter, so she did not come and returned after the third watch. Jiang Ruan smiled slightly apologetically, it was originally a misunderstanding, Fanger. Now that you've heard it clearly, this matter has nothing to do with me. Chen Fang was so angry that the makeup on her face continuously fell. No matter how she thought about it, she would never have predicted that Jiang Ruan would have such a lukewarm attitude. It was as if she had used all her strength to punch into soft cotton. Even though she had the strength, there was no way for her to use it. She had a bellyful of anger for no reason. However, Fanger, Jiang Ruan frowned slightly, it has been such a long time since our appointment, why are you only asking me about what happened that night? Could it be that you did not go to the pear garden at all, yet you are so certain that I did? Chen Fang was taken aback, a trace of nervousness flashed across her face. No, it's just that. However, this servant only found out today that young lady had never been there. That night, this servant had something to attend to and was unable to keep the appointment. Chen Fang was somewhat incoherent. She realized that no matter what she said, there would always be loopholes in her words. However, Jiang Ruan was considerate and opened her mouth, since this is the case, let's just treat it as a misunderstanding. Chen Fang bit her lip. Even though her heart was extremely unwilling, she could not find any place in which she could be in the right. She could only blame herself for coming too hastily, that she had not even thought of a comprehensive countermeasure. Just as she was worrying, she heard Jiang Ruan's faint voice again. Seeing that you rushed over in such a hurry, I thought that something had happened. It's good that you are all right. Chen Fang's heart suddenly tightened. She looked at Jiang Ruan with some uneasiness and met Jiang Ruan's smiling gaze. Jiang Ruan's gaze was extremely gentle, as charming as the spring water that tightly surrounded people. However, upon a closer look, one would feel that those clear and moist eyes contained bursts of murderous intent. The corners of her eyes were filled with a devilish sharpness. Chen Fang could not help but take 2 steps back. When she looked at Jiang Ruan again, there was nothing there. Suddenly, a trace of uncertainty emerged in her heart. An absurd thought appeared in her mind. Could it be that this seemingly weak and easily bullied young miss actually knew everything? Could it be that she had deliberately done this, that she was the one who benefited? Chen Fang clenched her fists tightly and shook her head vigorously. It was impossible. Jiang Ruan had lived in the rural residence for 5 years. She was very clear about what kind of person she was. Moreover, for a 10-year-old girl to have such a scheming mind, even if she said it, no one would believe it. This time, it was only by accident that she had allowed her to spoil her plans. Chen Fang forced a smile. It's all this servant's fault. I have disturbed young miss, please do not blame me. You also had good intentions. Jiang Ruan took a sip of tea. How could I bear to punish you? Speaking of which, it's my bad luck. Presumably, that night under the moonlight, when the beauty bloomed, it must have been beautiful and moving. Chen Fang wanted to vomit blood when she heard this. She forced herself to say, naturally, if young miss does not have any other instructions, this servant will go out and busy myself. There are still some matters at the rural residence. It's been hard on you, Jiang Ruan said faintly, go and busy yourself. The entire rural residence cannot do without you. These words had a profound meaning. Chen Fang's heart skipped a beat, as if there was something frightening following behind her. Very quickly, she hurriedly left. After Chen Fang left, Lian Xiao closed the door and spat, look at that undisciplined and out-of-control appearance. How is she like a servant? Just now, who was that questioning tone directed at? She doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Another day, I must properly teach her a lesson. Why wait for another day? Jiang Ruan closed the book, she will soon learn her lesson. Young miss. Baiji's eyes brightened. Could it be that night, Jiang Ruan nodded, if I don't keep the appointment, naturally, someone else will. It seems that Chen Xiaomei has not only invited a wolf, but also a wolf that loves gold. Chun Ying is more capable than I had imagined. She has saved me a lot of trouble. Lian Xiao smiled and said, that girl is very suspicious. In her eyes, I only put on a little act, and she couldn't wait to take the bait. However, I think that she is also harboring evil intentions. One is willing to fight while the other is willing to suffer with Qin Zhao. You have handled this matter beautifully. Jiang Ruan exclaimed in admiration, I don't know how many more days Qin Zhao can endure. Chun Ying, don't disappoint me. 2 flowers blossomed, each with a branch. On one side, Jiang Ruan and her 2 servants had turned the tables. On the other side, the owner of the good show was as sweet as honey. This year, the streets were filled with the fragrance of autumn, flowing smoke satin. The satin was incomparably smooth. Under the sunlight, it would reflect a faint brilliance. The madams and young ladies of wealthy families loved this kind of fabric the most. When they made a new dress, it would be extremely elegant and beautiful. At this moment, there were 2 rolls of flowing smoke satin on the table in the room. In front of the bronze mirror, a woman dressed in purple was sitting. This woman could be considered a flower and the moon. She was carefully examining the string of South Sea pearls on her neck. The pearls were of excellent quality. Each one was big and round, emitting a faint pink luster. It made the skin on her neck look even more fair. After a long while, Chunning finally took off the necklace on her neck. This kind of thing could not be worn outside. Otherwise, if other people saw that she, a servant girl, could afford such a good thing, they would suspect that she had come from a shady background. She got up and walked to the bedside. She reached under the bed and fished out a small box. Using a small copper key, she opened it. Unexpectedly, it was a small box of pearls and jadeite enamels. Chunning placed the pearl necklace in her hand into the box and looked at the light in front of her with satisfaction. Such a box full of high-quality jewelry, no matter what, she, as a servant, would not be able to collect so much. Chunning smiled slightly. That fool Chen Zhao was very obedient and had obediently sent the jewelry over. A few days ago, she had heard the news that Jiang Yuan was going to admire the flowers under the moonlight. That very night, she had gone to the pear garden to find out what was going on. Unexpectedly, she did not see Jiang Yuan there. Instead, as soon as she left, she was hugged from behind. At first, she was extremely shocked. That person moved closer to her ear and said, "Young miss, please do not shout. If other people see you in Zhao, you can only be tied to Zhao for the rest of your life." She stared blankly. That person continued, "Zhao's heart yearns for young miss to the extreme. This is why he was rude to young Mississippi. Young miss, Zhao will take good care of you." Chunning finally understood. This person was actually Chen Zhao. He had mistaken her for Jiang Yuan. She did not expect that Jiang Yuan and Chen Zhao actually had an affair. Before she could regain her senses, Chen Zhao had already begun to tear her clothes. Chunning originally wanted to scream, but just as she was about to do so, she stopped. Although Chen Zhao was the son of the steward of the estate, which didn't sound like much, she knew very well how much private property Nanny Lan had accumulated over the years. Chen Zhao's life was no less than that of a normal rich family. Although she was now the head maidservant of the estate, her monthly allowance and tips were far from enough. If she had a big tree like Chen Zhao, she would be able to rely on it. In a short period of time, Chunning clearly understood the pros and cons. At that moment, she no longer struggled and obediently did it with Chen Zhao. Chunning did not care about the purity of her body. If her body could be sold for a good price, what harm would there be in selling it? In the future, whether she married or became a concubine, it might be difficult for her to meet a benefactor like Chen Zhao again. How could she not seize this opportunity? When Chen Zhao woke up and discovered that it was Chunning beside him, he turned pale with fright. Chunning only coldly told him that if he did not use money to stuff her mouth, she would immediately report it to the authorities and let everyone know that Chen Zhao had humiliated her. Chen Zhao would never have imagined that a beauty was still a beauty, but a snake beauty. Chunning and Jiang Yuan were different. Jiang Yuan was the daughter of an official's family. Once her reputation was implicated, it would be a devastating blow to her. The Jiang family would not publicize this scandal and would only secretly give Jiang Yuan to Chen Zhao. However, Chunning had nothing to worry about. Moreover, she was extremely cunning and shameless. It was not impossible for her to file a complaint to the authorities. If this matter was really leaked out, even if Chen Zhao did not die, he would still lose a layer of skin. He had no other choice but to go along with Chun Ying's wishes. However, it was difficult for Chunning to climb up a big tree. How could her appetite be so easily satisfied? Again and again, Chen Zhao was already short of money, but Chunning still pressed him step by step. Just like this, Chen Zhao quietly sold the first piece of land. How could one piece of land be enough? Chunning believed that she was worth far more than this. Everything had a price. Chunning believed that she was worth more than this price. However, Chen Zhao felt that Chunning was demanding an exorbitant price. The dispute became more and more serious, and the infatuation of the beauty under the moonlight could no longer be seen. Chunning had just closed the case when she heard the door open with a bang. Chen Zhao, who had an anxious expression, walked in with large strides. Chapter 16. Go to hell. Bitch. Chen Zhao had already lost his mind as he laughed wildly. Chunning was so proud of herself that she didn't notice that Chen Zhaowu's eyes were red. By the time she realized what was going on, Chen Zhaowu had already pushed her to the ground. She wanted to scream, but Chen Zhaowu had already covered her mouth and nose. Chunning struggled with all her might, but a woman's strength was no match for a man's. This is already the biggest concession I can make. You naturally don't need to promise me. But in the future, we will meet in court. Chunning looked at him coldly. Chen Zhao was smelled by the fragrance of Chun Ying's beauty. For a moment, his heart was like a monkey and his mind was like a galloping horse. However, his attitude softened. Don't act like this. Today, I came to tell you that I am not a fool. It is impossible for you to follow me for the rest of your life. We should settle this matter. After all, this is a matter of mutual consent. Chen Zhao sat down on a stool in Chun Ying's room. He casually picked up the teapot on the table and drank the tea. Chunning wanted to open her mouth to stop him, but in the end, she held it in. A trace of impatience flashed through her eyes. In the end, she coldly asked, "What are you doing here?" Chen Zhao let go of her hand. Chun Ying's widened eyes stared at him, presenting a kind of terrifying strangeness. Chen Zhao was stunned for a moment before he suddenly regained his senses. He had actually killed someone. Chun Ying's gaze moved around Chen Zhao's body. She herself knew that although Chen Zhao had some silver, most of his wealth was still in the hands of Zhang Lan. This matter could not be known by Zhang Lan. Zhang Lan was a powerful person. At that time, it was uncertain who would be at a disadvantage. However, if Chen Zhao was a money tree, there would come a day when he would be squeezed dry. It would be better to be more efficient and make a huge profit. Chunning immediately stood up. She frowned as she looked at Chen Zhao in front of her. After not seeing him for a few days, Chen Zhao's expression was haggard. His eyes were bloodshot and his lips were so dry that a layer of skin had appeared. Chunning paused for a moment before saying, "You came." Chen Zhao. Chunning also looked at him relentlessly. "Are you going to give it or not?" Chen Zhao had just delivered the money 2 days ago. This time he must not be the god of wealth, but Wei Xiaobao did not know what he wanted. Chunning did not get angry but laughed instead. "My body is naturally not comparable to the ladies of Yihonglu. It is just that in your eyes, your future prospects are only something that can be bought with a few thousand taels of silver. Don't you think that you are looking down on yourself too much?" Chunning was the most vain person in her life, and she especially hated her family background. At this moment, Chen Zhao's words were no different from sprinkling salt on her wound. Chun Ying's heart immediately became angry. Her eyes turned, and she laughed. "That's right, this servant is a lowly servant, but what does this master count as? Could it be that you really think of yourself as the young master of a rich family? Or do you think that as long as you have Miss Jiang, you can climb the minister's residence?" Chen Zhao's face darkened. Chunning had seen through his thoughts with a single sentence, and her words were so harsh. "What do you want?" Chen Zhao asked. "You." Chen Zhao clenched his fists and squeezed out a few words from between his teeth. "Don't go too far." Chunning did not care about his expression and continued to speak. "We are all the same. Whether I am a servant or a servant, I still have to look at my master's face. What's more, isn't this master willing to give this servant money to spend? Or does this master feel that his future prospects are not worth these few taels of silver?" Chun Ying's hand tightened, and a bright red fingernail mark appeared on Chen Zhao's neck. She slowly smiled and said, "Could it be that this master wants to renege on the debt after eating it? You and I are willing. It is clear that you are the one who forced me. You and I have never interacted normally. Everyone in the Zhuangzi can testify. If you say that you and I are willing, when we go to court, do you think that Darren will believe your words?" Chen Zhao did not answer Chun Ying's words. He only wiped his mouth and sneered, "You, a lowly servant, can actually afford to drink high-quality Mount June silver needles. You really are taking the money that this master has given you and you don't feel that your hands are soft on spending it. However, when Chen Zhao was doing these things, he absolutely did not think that there was a pair of eyes in the dark that was closely watching his every move. The killing that he thought was flawless was completely seen by others. "You're crazy." Without waiting for Chunying to finish, Chen Zhao had already jumped up and shook off Chunying's hand that was on his body. An inch of land in Dong Street is worth gold. A house with 3 entrances needs at least 1,000 taels of silver. How can I take that out? You think too highly of yourself. Do you think that you are the red card of Yi Honglu, 1,000 taels of gold in one night? Chen Zhao knew that it would be difficult to convince himself with these words. He gritted his teeth. What do you want? Chen Zhao raised his head to look at Chunying. Chunying looked at him mockingly. Her smile was so dazzling. The bright red rouge stain at the corner of her mouth was like a life-taking talisman. This kind of greedy beauty, once she opened her mouth, there would not be a day where she would be satisfied. Therefore, this time was not the end. It would be good if she died. If Chunying did not exist in this world, he would not be in such a difficult situation. Thinking up to this point, Chunying's voice softened. It's not that I don't understand and don't know any better. For better or for worse, we do have some friendly relations. How could I bear to force you to your death? It's just that you have taken my body. After this incident, who would want me in the future? You have to give me some compensation so that when I release the manor in the future, I can still have a place to stay and live. Her slender jade-like fingers lightly pressed on Chen Zhao's forehead. There is a house with 3 entrances in Dong Street Shirley Pu. Buy it for me. After buying it, we will go our separate ways. No one owes the other anything. Chen Zhao was exasperated. With a "pa" sound, he smashed the teapot on the table. Don't go too far. He staggered backwards. Then, he carefully stretched out his hand to test Chunying's nose. Following that, he sat on the ground. His whole body could not help but tremble. After panicking for half an hour, Chen Zhao finally calmed down. He thought for a moment. Then, he suddenly sneered and spat on Chunying's face. "Bitch, this is what you get for going against me." Then, he lifted Chunying's body. He found a big cloth bag in the room and put Chunying inside. Then, he quietly left the room. "It is you who bullied me, right?" Chunying smilingly walked to Chen Zhao's side. Her jade-like hands slowly caressed Chen Zhao's neck. "However, why did you come here today?" Chunying could only tightly hold on to Chen Zhao's hands. Her eyes were wide open. Her legs desperately kicked. In the midst of her struggle, her body gradually softened. Finally, she stopped breathing. Chen Zhao was so angry that his face turned red. He had long heard of Chunying's unreasonable and shameless behavior. However, he did not expect that once he was entangled with her, he would end up in such a situation. A few days ago, when he sold the land, he had already had a big fight with Zhang Lan. Now, Zhang Lan had already locked up all the house and land deeds. He could not do anything about it. However, Chunying was still chasing after him. He was already penniless and had reached the end of his road. Chapter 17. The moon was like a hook, and the twilight was heavy. The cold wind rustled the branches in the deserted backyard. A jackdaw perched on a branch, cawed twice, and flapped its wings before disappearing into the night sky. In the courtyard, a maid carrying a laundry basket hurriedly walked past. She heard a muffled plop sound coming from the courtyard. Surprised, she turned her head. In the darkness, there was a rustling sound, and the faint sound of a cat meowing. Thinking that it was a wild cat coming in to catch a mouse, the maid tightened her clothes. Feeling the ghostly atmosphere in the courtyard, she hurriedly quickened her pace and left. Outside the pear orchard, Lian Xiao was holding a large paper bag in her hands. Rather happily, she said to Jiang Yuan, today, that Xiao Yuan sent over some lily cakes that she bought from outside. She said that they taste very good. Later, when we return to the room, Miss will try a few pieces. Jiang Yuan nodded, and then looked up at the sky. Dark clouds had covered a large part of the moon, and the light outside was misty. There were only a few dismal red lanterns on the road. The festive colors in the midst of the desolation of the people added a bit of strangeness to the night. Lian Xiao followed Jiang Ruan's gaze and thought, the sky darkened really early, and it's getting cold outside. Miss, be careful not to catch a cold. A dark and windy night to kill. Jiang Ruan suddenly smiled, what a beautiful scene. Her words were strange, and Lian Xiao looked over in confusion, only to see a person hurrying over in the darkness. When he got closer, she could see that it was Chen Zhao. Chen Zhao also saw the two of them, and hurriedly stopped. Jiang Ruan nodded slightly in acknowledgement. Chen Zhao bowed. Mississippi. Lian Xiao nervously protected Jiang Ruan. Meeting this person in the dark, it was hard to avoid an accident. Jiang Ruan's gaze followed Chen Zhao's nervous expression to his exposed neck. The bright red scar of the family was particularly eye-catching, but Chen Zhao himself was completely unaware of it. Jiang Ruan's lips curled up, but she did not speak, only staring at him meaningfully. Under the gloomy moonlight, Jiang Ruan's eyebrows were illuminated by the lantern light, giving her an additional demonic air. It was as if she had just matured into a blood-sucking demon among the flowers under the moonlight. It was clearly a young and inexperienced face, but it was as if she was an evildoer who had lived for a very, very long time, overlooking the common people struggling in the mortal world. Her charming eyes locked onto Chen Zhao's body with a smile that wasn't a smile. Chen Zhao felt as if his soul had been hooked by that pair of eyes. However, when he looked at it again, it felt like an abyss, giving off a heart-palpitating fear. Her mood, which was alternating between cold and hot, finally transformed into a slight smile at the corner of Jiang Ruan's red lips. Chen Zhao clenched his teeth and a spark of fire suddenly sprang up in his eyes. He recalled that it was because of Jiang Ruan that he had provoked Chunning. If it had not been for her, he would not have needed to kill. Now, he had killed someone, but Jiang Ruan was still standing in the same place, perfectly fine. No matter how he thought about it, he was filled with unwillingness. How could he suffer a double loss? Catching a glimpse of Chen Zhao's wolf-like gaze, Jiang Ruan glanced at Lian Xiao and lightly said, "Let's go, it's dark outside, don't provoke any unclean things." Chen Zhao's body stiffened as if a bucket of cold water had been poured on his head, instantly driving away the heat in his heart. He only felt a cold wind blowing. Chun Ying's wide-open eyes were right in front of him. Chen Zhao fiercely shuddered. By the time he regained his senses, the two of them had already walked far away. He clenched his fists and left angrily. When the two of them returned to the room, Lian Xiao had just put down the 100 boxes of pastries when Bai Ji hurriedly walked over, her expression full of anxiety. "Miss," Jiang Ruan waved her hand, indicating for Lian Xiao to close the door, before sitting down on the bed. "What's wrong?" "Chunning is dead," Bai Ji said. "What?" Lian Xiao was surprised. "How did she die?" Chen Zhao was rather straightforward. Jiang Ruan sneered, but Chunning was stupid. Seeing Jiang Ruan's calm expression, without the slightest bit of surprise, Bai Ji was stunned. "Miss, already knew?" Chen Zhao's temperament was irritable, while Chunning was forceful. The two of them were bound to have a dispute, and initially wanted to make use of their dispute to make a fuss. Who would have thought that Chen Zhao would be so vicious and merciless, actually silencing her? Jiang Ruan said indifferently, but Chunning only had herself to blame. Lian Xiao frowned, that Chen Zhao is really not a good person, to be so cruel and unscrupulous, but Chunning asking him for money was asking a tiger for its skin. She deserved to lose her life. However, Bai Ji somewhat disagreed. After all, it is a human life, this Chen Zhao is too scary. Fortunately, Miss was quick-witted, otherwise, today would have been a disaster for us. "How did you know?" Jiang Ruan asked Bai Ji. Bai Ji paused, then said softly, "Qiu Yan told me, she said that she saw Chen Zhao kill someone with her own eyes." "Qiu Yan?" Jiang Ruan raised her eyebrows. "She is a smart person." "Miss, that Chun Ying's death has nothing to do with us, right? Chen Zhao killed someone, don't tell me we can just let it go like this." Chen Zhao has planted a seed of disaster for himself. Jiang Ruan laughed lightly. "We don't need to take the initiative. Very soon, someone will tell on us, and the matter will come to light. Lian Xiao said, this servant has always felt somewhat uneasy, always feeling that this matter is not so simple. Although Chun Ying's death was not intentional, it still has something to do with us. Jiang Yuan casually picked up the book on the table. What are you afraid of? The two of them had an affair and killed someone. Could it be that it has something to do with me? If they want to pour dirty water on me, I'm afraid it won't be an easy thing to do. After all, they can't say that I made the two of them have an affair, right? If they want to investigate, go ahead and investigate. What can they find out? Lian Xiao slapped her own head. That's right. This servant was muddle-headed. We did not expect this. What does it have to do with us? Chun Ying and Chen Zhao do not have any friendship with us. Even if the officials come, we can still straighten our backs. With this, Bai Ji and Lian Xiao were relieved, and got up to fetch some hot water. Jiang Yuan sat under the oil lamp, slowly flipping through the book, but her gaze fell elsewhere. She had lied. She was not surprised by Chun Ying's death, because she had already known this ending. Everyone had their own weakness and bottom line. Chen Zhao was irascible and suspicious, and Chun Ying's repeated demands would only wear out his patience. He no longer believed that Chun Ying would ever be satisfied, and his dissatisfaction would gradually increase, eventually reaching a critical point. And when his anger and guilt reached an extreme, the ruthlessness in Chen Zhao's bones would be stimulated, and killing would be a matter of course. To facilitate all of this, Chun Ying's cooperation was needed. Chun Ying's greed was innate, and if there was an opportunity to reap without sowing, she would not give it up. And what Jiang Yuan herself had done was to let Bai Ji bribe a few servants to unintentionally mention Chun Ying's craftiness and insatiable greed in front of Chen Zhao. With the right time, the right place, and the right people, even if Chun Ying did not die, she would have to die. But if this was the case, she absolutely could not tell the two servant girls. In their eyes, she was only a down-and-out young lady who had been forced to the extreme and rose up to resist, but she was still kind-hearted in her bones. But only she herself knew what kind of rotten heart was hidden under this skin. Chapter 18. At this moment, a person rushed in from outside. Seeing that Jiang Yuan and the others were in the room, she rushed in without knocking. Lian Xiao was startled, and when she saw clearly, she reprimanded, Xiao Yuan, why did you run in such a hurry? Lian Xiao stared at her. How could our miss kill someone? You are obviously slandering us. How shameless. The next day, Jiang Yuan woke up early. Bai Ji brought in some freshly cooked corn porridge from outside. The corn was cooked until it was soft, and the simmered rice porridge emitted a faint sweet fragrance. Lian Xiao was curious. The kitchen is so good today, why is there corn porridge? There are many soldiers outside, surrounding the residence, saying that someone saw Miss kill someone. Xiao Yuan's gaze was full of panic. Lan Momo is leading them over here. It was rare in life to be able to maintain a normal heart in the midst of great joy and sorrow. In the past, whenever his miss thought of the happy times in the minister's fu, she would always secretly shed tears of sorrow. But now, he had never seen her show such an expression. She was incomparably calm. Thinking of this, Bai Ji said to Jiang Yuan, Miss seems to be happier every day. Lian Xiao was stunned. She is indeed honest. She then picked up the bowl. Miss, drink a few mouthfuls, it is good for the body. Corn porridge could not be considered a delicacy, and its effect on the body was naturally not as good as that of precious herbs or fish. But now, even a bowl of corn porridge seemed so rare, and her days were indeed a little down. Bai Ji felt a little sad, but she saw Jiang Yuan drink a mouthful without hesitation, and beckoned them to eat some too. Bai Ji was a little emotional. It was rare for her miss to be willing to endure such a big change. She grew up with her miss in the courtyard, and as a servant girl who was not favored, she naturally suffered from cold eyes. In just a few years, she had seen through the fickleness of human nature, and was more mature than other servant girls of the same age. But she felt that her patience and calmness were only a so-so in front of her Mississippi. She did not know when it started, as if she had a serious illness, and her miss had become somewhat unpredictable. Speak slowly, Bai Ji frowned. What happened? Bai Ji smiled. Xiao Yuan sent it. Since she had helped Xiao Yuan mend her clothes a few days ago, Xiao Yuan had become obedient and knew how to return the favor, so she ran over more frequently. Xiao Yuan held the door and panted, her face flushed, and after a while, she said, "Miss, it is bad." Jiang Yuan smiled slightly, but did not point it out. The oppression of life was nothing. So what if you lived in luxury? The scariest thing was that you lacked nothing, yet you felt that you had nothing. You had no lover, no relatives, no family, and no friends. Later, she thought that she had a lover, but it was also fake. Moreover, compared to being trapped in a wooden basin like a human swine, watching helplessly as her loved ones were humiliated, it was already much, much better. At the very least, she still had a complete body and freedom, right? At least she was still alive. As long as she was alive, there would be a chance for her to make a comeback. She crawled out of hell not to fuss over such trivial matters. Don't worry, Jiang Yuan put down the bowl unhurriedly, just wait. The breakfast served at the farmstead consisted of coarse rice porridge that was so thin that it could reflect a person's shadow. There were also a few salted vegetables, but there was no corn porridge. It was not that the ingredients were expensive or cheap, but rather that the kitchen staff were unwilling to spend too much effort on this side. When they first arrived at the farmstead, Bai Ji and Lian Xiao did not quarrel with the kitchen staff over this matter. However, even though they quarreled, there was no change. Moreover, the capital did not pay any attention to this matter. There was not even a single person in charge, so Jiang Yuan became accustomed to this. Chapter 19. The sudden news made Bai Ji and Lian Xiao angry and shocked, but Jiang Yuan was not flustered and even had the mood to continue eating porridge. Xiao Yuan could not help but say, "Miss, you should make plans early. Those people seem very confident, as if they are certain that Miss has killed someone." Jiang Yuan smiled faintly, "It's nothing. In this world, it's not impossible to distinguish black from white. If there is, then there is. If there isn't, then there isn't. I've never done it, so even if the officials come, I'm not afraid." Xiao Yuan clenched her teeth and steeled her heart. To be honest, this servant has worked in the rural residence for so many years and knows a little about these things. Miss does not know the depth of this is really a dead end. If Miss is convicted, even if Miss is innocent, you will still be guilty. Miss, it is better to make plans early and inform Master. Bai Ji also nodded, "Yes, Miss, this time these people are coming aggressively, it is better to ask Master for help, Master will not just stand by and watch." Lian Xiao also nodded, "Miss, this matter should be handled with urgency." Under everyone's gaze, Jiang Yuan gently shook her head, "No need, Xiao Yuan, thank you for your reminder, but the officials are already on their way here, it is not convenient for you to stay for long, otherwise you will be implicated. You should leave first, if there is something I need your help with, I will let Bai Ji find you." Xiao Yuan looked out the window and nodded, "Miss does not need to be so polite, Miss is the master, it is only right and proper for a servant to listen to the master's instructions. This servant will leave now, if Miss needs this servant will definitely do her best." After Xiao Yuan left, Jiang Yuan knocked on the table and lightly said, "When the officials arrive, no matter what happens, you are not allowed to reveal anything to the minister's Fu, and you are not allowed to take the initiative to ask father for help." "Why?" Bai Ji did not understand. Miss is Master's biological daughter after all, blood is thicker than water, if Master can help, Miss will also be spared some suffering. "Miss, now is not the time to be angry with Master. How can there be overnight hatred between relatives?" Jiang Yuan shook her head, "You think it is simple, but if something really happens to me and you ask father for help, I am afraid that you will not get help, but a burden." Lian Xiao frowned, "What do you mean, Miss?" "Think about it." Jiang Yuan stared at her fingertips, "If I was really slandered as a murderer, what would father do when he found out? I'm afraid that he wouldn't clear my name of injustice, but rather, he would find someone to mediate and suppress this matter. But now everyone outside knows that the government officials have sent people to arrest me. This matter can no longer be suppressed. Even if it is suppressed on the surface, the rumors will only spread that I killed someone and borrowed my father's power to settle this matter. From now on, my bad name will be carried. Bai Ji and Lian Xiao were drenched in cold sweat as they listened. Fear lingered in their hearts. Lian Xiao asked, "Since we can't ask Master for help, what should we do? This situation seems to be a dead end, but it's actually filled with opportunities. There's no need to worry. You'll be able to fight back from the dead. The final winner is still unknown. I have an idea. You don't have to worry." With Jiang Ruan's words, Lian Xiao and Bai Ji gradually calmed down. Bai Ji said, "Understood, Mississippi. Now, let's pretend that nothing has happened." Jiang Ruan took out a piece of paper from the book beside her and handed it to Lian Xiao. "After tomorrow, pass this to Chou Yan." Lian Xiao nodded. After thinking for a while, she poured a cup of tea for Jiang Ruan. Jiang Ruan was in no hurry to drink it. She gently stroked the corner of her sleeve. The matter of asking Jiang Quan for help that the two servant girls had mentioned was rejected by Jiang Ruan at the very beginning. Besides her explanation, there were other reasons. After all, there was no need for her to write a letter. The minister's office would be the first to receive the news. Zhang Lan's family would certainly report this matter to their superiors. Xia Yan and Jiang Su Su were eager to see her fall into misfortune. Naturally, they would not let go of this opportunity to add fuel to the fire and hit her when she was down. They could do a lot of things, and Jiang Quan would not stand up for her. In her previous life, during the palace coup, she had seen her father's cold and detached gaze when he announced that she was a demoness who brought disaster to the country. She knew that Jiang Quan had never treated her as his own flesh and blood. His only daughter was Jiang Su Su. Even if she were to die, she would not ask the minister's office or Jiang Quan for help. Moreover, after this matter, she still had a big gift to give to Jiang Quan and Jiang Su Su, mother and daughter. It would be a gift to repay them for sending her to the rural residence for 5 years. The play still had to continue, but the performer had long been changed. While she was lost in thought, there was a commotion coming from outside the courtyard. Before Lian Xiao could react, the door was broken open with a whoosh. A few yamen runners with sabers on their waists walked in and asked in a hoarse voice, "Where is Jiang Ruan?" Jiang Ruan stood up and bowed slightly. The head yamen runner raised his head and looked at Jiang Ruan. He was slightly surprised to see that the other party was a fresh and lively young girl. However, he still said seriously, "Miss Jiang, I'm sorry. Someone said that they saw you and killed someone." Jiang Ruan looked at him in surprise. "Oh, I wonder who it was." Her voice was soft and gentle, like the willow catkins in spring, gently brushing against one's heart. There was a kind of unintentional touching. The yamen runner's voice could not help but soften, as if he was afraid of disturbing this crystal-like person. It was the youngest son of the steward of this rural residence, Chen Zhao. Lian Xiao finally could not help but reply, "Our miss is gentle and weak, how could she kill someone?" It was obviously that vile person who wanted to splash dirty water on Miss. The yamen runner was also somewhat hesitant. He saw that Jiang Ruan was looking at him with a smile, and the corners of her eyes were raised. There was an indescribable charm to her. She was clearly a little girl who was still wet behind the ears, but she had the charm of a mature woman. However, there was an indescribable coldness in her gentle temperament. This kind of contradiction mixed together made her look like a demon who had mistakenly entered the wrong place, attracting people's gazes to her. Jiang Ruan said, "Lian Xiao, there is no need to say more. Gongzheng has his own judgment, we just need to watch." When the yamen runner heard this, his impression of Jiang Ruan improved. He only cupped his fists and said, "It was our rashness to disturb Mississippi. There is a search outside, please come out of the house to make it easier for everyone to investigate." Jiang Ruan smiled and let Bai Ji and Lian Xiao follow her out of the house. As soon as they left the house, they saw yamen runners everywhere, and the small courtyard was instantly cramped. Chen Zhao stood beside Zhang Lan, and when he saw Jiang Ruan, his eyes flashed. Without waiting for Qin Zhao to speak, Lian Xiao jumped up, pointed at Qin Zhao's nose and scolded, "It was obviously you who killed someone, and you still want to blame it on our Mississippi. You are muddle-headed. Pei, you are a beast in human skin." Zhang Lan sneered, "What are you saying, Lian Xiao? Food can be eaten indiscriminately, but words cannot be spoken indiscriminately. If you want to falsely accuse our Zhao, be careful that you will not be able to bear the consequences." Chen Zhao also looked at Jiang Yuan with hatred and resentment. "Miss, Zhao did not want to say this, but Zhao cannot go against his conscience. I hope you will not resent Zhao." Jiang Yuan smiled slightly. "Conscience? Naturally, I will not resent you. People have souls after death, especially those who died unjustly. They will definitely find the person who harmed them and seek revenge. I am not afraid of ghosts seeking revenge, but I don't know if you are." Chapter 20. Her beauty was picturesque, but under the sunlight, she looked like a pink skeleton. Her words were gentle, but carried a ghostly aura. Chen Zhao unconsciously took a step back, only feeling that under the bright sky, his back was covered in a layer of cold sweat. Seeing this, Zhang Lan laughed, "Stupid brat, don't worry, miss, if anything happens, master will take care of it. Miss, just stay here." These words were vicious, as if she was certain that Jiang Yuan was the mastermind of the murder. With one sentence, she had determined her crime, leaving no chance for others to refute. Jiang Yuan smiled, "Lan Momo, why do you say this? How can you be so sure? Could it be such a coincidence that Lan Momo also saw me kill people?" Zhang Lan was stunned, and laughed dryly. This old servant did not." "That's right," Jiang Yuan said softly. "Lan Momo, please pay attention when you speak. Those who don't know might think that Lan Momo is deliberately framing me." Zhang Lan's heart tightened, and she raised her eyes to look at Jiang Yuan. Jiang Yuan was looking at her with a smile, but it seemed that the smile did not reach her eyes. The spring water in her eyes was like a black abyss, cold and mocking. At this moment, a few soldiers ran over and said to the head of the Yamen runners, who seemed to be deep in thought, "Head, a female corpse was found in the well." As soon as these words came out, it was like an earth-shattering explosion. The surrounding servant girls immediately retreated to Jiang Yuan's side, looking at the master and servants with eyes full of fear and disdain. Lian Xiao and Bai Ji were shocked, and could not help but look up at Jiang Yuan. However, Jiang Yuan's expression did not change, and she was still standing there with a faint smile. Her body was weak but firm, inexplicably reassuring. The two servant girls calmed down, and without looking at the people around them, they just stood there calmly. The master and servants' calmness made the head of the Yamen runners have a whole new level of respect for them. After such an accident, it was rare for someone to not show their emotions. He had been handling cases for many years, and this kind of calmness, unless they really had not done anything bad. The head of the Yamen runners swept his gaze across the courtyard and saw that apart from Jiang Yuan and her two companions, the rest of the people had formed their own cliques. This was somewhat illogical. These servants addressed Jiang Yuan as Miss, yet their attitudes were not respectful. Moreover, this courtyard was extremely dilapidated and did not seem like the boudoir of a noble family's young lady. The head of the Yamen runners had some understanding in his heart. All the young mistresses who were sent to the manor had committed a crime and were sent here to reflect on their mistakes. However, this young mistress seemed to have bad luck. Not only was she living in dire straits, but she was also framed. "Boss?" the officer below asked. The head of the Yamen runners returned to his senses and looked at Jiang Yuan. "Miss Jiang, I'm sorry, but the female corpse was found in your courtyard. For the time being, we will have to trouble you to follow us to the prison for a period of time." After saying this, he began to size up Jiang Yuan's expression. Jiang Yuan very calmly accepted his gaze and even courteously bowed to him. "I will listen to Darren's instructions." She did not cry nor did she make a fuss. It did not seem like she was being taken to the prison. Instead, it was as if she was attending a banquet. Her demeanor was not affected in the slightest. The Yamen runner was even more impressed with her in his heart. He thoughtfully said, Miss Jiang need not worry. Li Mi, will definitely investigate this matter to the bottom of the water. I will certainly not let a single bad person off. His words had a profound meaning. Jiang Ruan smiled faintly, thank you, Darren. The surrounding officers were somewhat surprised to see this. Their boss, Li Mi, had always been a black-faced deity. He was even more unfriendly towards criminals. His personality was the most inflexible and rigid. Today, however, he was treating this silly little girl with gentleness and care. Chen Zhao also felt this and smiled. Darren must diligently investigate the case and seek justice for the common people. After saying this, he turned his head to look at Jiang Ruan. Miss, Zhao will come to see you in a few days. Miss, don't be too worried. What kind of joke is this? Lian Xiao snorted. On one hand, you are framing us, and on the other hand, you are trying to please our Mississippi Chen Zhao. Do you think that Miss is a fool for you to play with? Remember, you are only the son of a steward. You will never have the right to mention your name in front of Mississippi. Your name only has 2 words, and that is servant. Pay! Lian Xiao spat on Chen Zhao's face. Chen Zhao's expression turned green, then white, then green. Jiang Ruan smiled faintly and said to Li Mi, Darren, since Chen Zhao said that he saw me kill someone, it has nothing to do with these 2 maidservants. I hope that Darren will allow these 2 maidservants to stay in the residence and send a message to my family. Li Mi thought about it and nodded, all right, I promise you. Lian Xiao's eyes were brimming with tears as she pulled Jiang Ruan's hand. Miss, you must be careful. Don't let others bully you. After thinking about it, she felt uneasy. It is better for this servant to accompany Mississippi. This servant is not afraid of going to prison. Jiang Ruan laughed in spite of herself and squeezed her hand. Silly girl, this is not an outing, why are you looking for companions? I will be out soon. If you follow me, who will help me send a message to my family? Jiang Ruan's emphasis on the word deliver a letter caused Lian Xiao to stare blankly. Baiji walked over to pull her away and said to Jiang Ruan, Miss, please take good care of yourself. We servants will definitely deliver the letter. Jiang Ruan nodded and said to Li Mi, let's go. The surrounding officials were stunned again. They had never seen someone take the initiative to enter the prison like this. Moreover, Jiang Ruan's actions made it seem as if she was the master, and these officials were like accompanying guards. Chen Zhao's eyes also flashed with a trace of profound meaning. He had originally wanted to see Jiang Ruan's battered and exhausted appearance, but he did not expect that even at this time, she would still have a calm and unhurried appearance. She even glanced at him with a smile that was not a smile. Her graceful bearing was still as before, causing one's heart to beat rapidly. After a long while, Zhang Lan fiercely slapped him. What are you looking at? What's there to look at? What bad luck! After Jiang Ruan arrived at the prison, Li Mi arranged for her to be alone in a cell. There were other people locked up in the prison, and when they saw a fresh and lively young girl, their mouths were filled with filthy words. However, Jiang Ruan looked at them coldly, neither angry nor shy. When the people in the cell next door saw her like this, they were somewhat surprised and curiously leaned against the iron bars to look at her. Seeing that Jiang Ruan had no intention of taking the initiative to acknowledge them, they opened their mouths. Hey, young lady, why were you captured? Jiang Ruan looked towards the direction of the voice and saw a dirty person looking at her. Her clothes were covered in dust and mud, her hair was disheveled, and her face could not be seen clearly. However, her voice was incomparably sweet, and it was the voice of a young woman. Jiang Ruan glanced at her and did not acknowledge her. The woman was stunned and unforgiving. She said, Hey, why are you ignoring me? Could it be that you are deaf? You look quite pretty, but it turns out that you are someone who cannot hear. TSK, so pitiful. Jiang Ruan looked at her. What does it have to do with you? So you are not deaf and mute, the woman exclaimed in surprise. I am about to suffocate to death here. You came just in time, we can keep each other company. Chapter 21. After a moment of silence, Jiang Ruan said, have you been here for a long time? Seeing that Jiang Ruan was willing to speak, the woman was afraid that she had been suppressed for a long time. She immediately poured out the beans. I have been here for almost a year, and no one has been here for more than half a year. Little girl, what did you do to be imprisoned here? Jiang Ruan smiled faintly. I did not do anything. Then why? The woman stared blankly and was about to speak when she seemed to understand something. Could it be that you were also wrongly imprisoned? But you look like a young lady from a noble family, how dare they? Jiang Ruan looked at her. What do you mean? The woman evaded. No, it's nothing. Jiang Ruan sighed softly. This sigh contained helplessness, as if she had experienced the greatest pain in life. It weighed heavily on one's heart, causing one to feel a burst of sadness. The woman quietly looked at Jiang Ruan through her hair that covered her eyes. Jiang Ruan looked at her with a smile. That pair of upturned charming eyes were full of strength and warmth, as if it could make one feel at ease. The other party was clearly just a little girl of 10 years old, but her eyes were full of convincing power. It seemed to have a bewitching expression, causing one to be unable to help but pour out their thoughts. The woman swallowed her saliva. You have just arrived, so you do not know. If you want to leave this place, you have to rely on money. I was originally a young married woman. After a year of marriage, when the official went out to sea to do business, he encountered roving bandits and could not return. Only I lived with my 80-year-old mother-in-law. Who knew that brother-in-law he coveted the money left behind by the official, and took advantage of my absence to strangle mother-in-law to death, and then framed me. The prefectural magistrate here is a muddle-headed official. After accepting his brother-in-law's money, he arrested me and threw me into prison without saying a word. I confessed under torture. Although I was not sentenced to death, I can only stay in prison for a long time. When the woman spoke of her sorrow, her voice was already hoarse, but surprisingly, she did not shed tears. Presumably, after a year in prison, her tears had already dried up. Although the pain penetrated her heart, she could only accept her fate. Seeing that Jiang Ruan was silent, the woman slowed down and said, "But little girl, you are different from me. Although the clothes you're wearing don't look very good, I understand that you are definitely not the daughter of an ordinary family. How did you end up like this?" Jiang Ruan smiled faintly. Even a small family is so complicated. How can a large and influential family be spared from scheming and scheming? When the woman heard this, she also felt that it made sense. However, the gaze she used to look at Jiang Ruan with even more pity. "Little miss, the inside of the prison is not like the outside. I have been here for a year, and this is not a place for people to stay. Since you and I are both people with bitter fates, it would be best for us to take care of each other. My name is Xu Fen, you can call me Fen Jia." Jiang Ruan nodded. "Sister Fen." She looked around. Are all the people who are imprisoned here wrongly accused? Xu Fen shook her head. Not all of them, but most of them are. A portion of the people here have the same experience as me. There are also some who have really committed crimes, but do not have enough money to redeem their freedom. Anyone who has committed a crime and has money, Qian Wanli will release them. Qian Wanli was the prefectural magistrate here. Jiang Ruan clearly remembered that this person was extremely greedy. Even if a wild goose passed by, he would still pluck a few of its feathers. These past few years, he had not stopped taking advantage of women here. Presumably, this time, he had also taken Chen Zhao's money. However, Qian Wanli thought more than Chen Zhao. Even though he knew her identity, he still imprisoned her. He wanted to fish another sum of money from Jiang Quan. Jiang Quan would definitely make this deal, and Jiang Su Su and her daughter were also eager to do so. However, she would not let these people have their way. Qian Wanli wanted to eat until he was fat in one bite, and she did not mind letting him have a taste of the consequences of being stuffed to death. If there is a chance to redress your grievances, would you be willing to do so? Jiang Ruan asked Xu Fen. Xu Fen stared blankly and looked at her inquiringly. How could there be a chance to redress my grievances? I have been here for a year and have long seen clearly that there is no longer any fairness or justice to speak of here. If you want to cry out your grievances, then you are gravely mistaken. Elder sister advises you, it is best not to do that, otherwise, you will suffer. Jiang Yuan smiled faintly, Sister Fun, don't forget, my father is not an ordinary person. If he knows that I am here, he will certainly try his best to save me and clear my name. Now that I have this opportunity, I will certainly not forget you. Hearing Jiang Yuan mention her father, Xu Fen's expression was somewhat hesitant. Does your father really have that kind of ability? Jiang Yuan nodded. If that is the case, then it could not be any better. A glimmer of hope suddenly rose in Xu Fen's eyes, but in the blink of an eye, she doubted, your father dotes on you so much, how could he let others fall into such a predicament? Jiang Yuan lowered her head, and a small ray of sunlight shone through the dark window of the prison cell, shining on her spotlessly white neck. Her slightly drooping eyelashes concealed the emotions in her eyes, only making people feel that her frail shoulders were so fragile, and her posture involuntarily made people feel pity for her. Xu Fen sighed, forget it, I will not ask about your family matters. It's just that, will your father really come to save you? Yes, the maidservant beside me has already gone back to pass on the message. Very soon, father will send someone to pick me up. Jiang Yuan blinked. When? Xu Fen was still somewhat doubtful. Tomorrow. Jiang Yuan smiled, I think there will be a chance to cry out your grievances tomorrow. Sister Fen, at that time, not only you, but also all the prisoners in this prison cell, you must seize this opportunity and cry out your grievances with all your might. You must remember, the harder you cry, the higher the possibility that you will be released. Qian Wanli's death would be even more miserable. With this opportunity, Xu Fen could not help but nod her head, and raised her voice to tell the entire prison cell about this matter. The night passed very quickly. On the 10th day of the new year, the sun was completely hidden in the thick layers of clouds. Heavy snowflakes floated down from the sky, and one's breath was filled with large chunks of snow. The prison cell was dark and damp, and ice had formed in several places. Xu Fen found some straw on her side and gave it to Jiang Yuan so that Jiang Yuan could use it as a cushion to keep her warm. Jiang Yuan gently shook her head. This prison cell, compared to the prison cell that she had stayed in her previous life, was simply heaven on earth. At that time, she carried the crime of being a demoness who brought disaster to the country and was arranged to be in the most terrifying and gloomy water cell. More than half of the pool was filled with water, and her whole body was soaked in the cold and wet water. There were also fat mice in the water that nibbled at her body. The water current battered against her body, making people feel cold from head to toe. Even if there was another heavy snowfall like this, it would not be able to compare to 1,000th of that place. Now, it was as if the scene had reappeared. She was once again locked up in the prison cell, but this time, she would not be as helpless and miserable as she had been in her previous life, where she would be tortured to her heart's content. Now, she was still here, but if she owed a debt, she had to pay it back. The suffering she had suffered now, along with the pain from her previous life, would be repaid at the hands of those people. At that time, they would see who would end up more miserable than the other. Chapter 22. Dong Street was particularly lively today because the prefectural magistrate wanted to hear a case. It was said that a young miss who had been sent to the rural residence had killed a servant girl and thrown her into a dry well. The witness was the son of the rural residence's steward. Witnesses and material evidence were present. Most people said that the young miss who had killed the young miss was vicious and did not know how the servant girl had offended the young miss. There were also some who said that the young miss had lowered her status and was so calculative with a servant girl that she did not hesitate to kill. Which family's young miss was so arrogant? In the yamen, a middle-aged man with a big belly was sitting in the most central seat. He was wearing a lake green silk robe embroidered with brocade. The jade belt around his waist could not cover his fat figure. This person was fair and plump, wearing a jade ring inlaid with gold on his thumb. It was the prefectural magistrate, Qian Wanli. The person sitting on the left side of the centermost seat was not as rich as Qian Wanli. On the contrary, the material of his clothes was extremely simple and could even be considered coarse. His entire body exuded a shabby aura, which was incompatible with the hall full of riches and honor. Qian Wanli, on the other hand, was very respectful to this plainly dressed guest. It could even be said that he was flattering him. He ordered his subordinates to pour a cup of hot tea for the guest and smiled. "Lord Wang, this case, what do you think?" Wang Darren glanced at him and said indifferently, "You go ahead, I will watch." "Yes, yes." Qian Wanli quietly took out a handkerchief from his bosom and wiped his sweat. He glanced at the people below and slammed the gavel, "Bring the prisoner up." When Jiang Yuan was brought out of the cell by Li Mi, Shufan grabbed her hand uneasily. "Will there be anything wrong?" "Nothing." Jiang Yuan patted her hand. "My father came to pick me up. Remember what I said, don't worry, everything will be fine soon." Shufan let go of her hand, and Li Mi looked at Jiang Yuan with some pity. In fact, it was not Jiang Yuan's father who came to pick her up, and no one pleaded for her. Today was just a trial. Now all the spearheads were pointed at Jiang Yuan, and there was no one who could speak up for Jiang Yuan. Even if he wanted to help, he was powerless. Moreover, as the person handling the case, he had to avoid arousing suspicion. Li Mi sighed in his heart. He knew that Jiang Yuan would not be able to escape this calamity. She would definitely bear this crime. Thinking of Jiang Yuan's miserable future, Li Mi's attitude became much gentler. In the public hall, when Jiang Yuan was brought in, the crowd that had gathered outside the hall to watch the commotion was somewhat astonished. From afar, they had thought that the young miss who had the courage to kill must be a fiendish, vulgar and despicable shrew. After all, one's appearance was born from one's heart. Who would have thought that the one he brought would be a beautiful little girl? Her brows were calm and gentle, and she didn't look the slightest bit terrifying. It was easy for people to believe their own eyes, but for a moment, they did not believe that Jiang Yuan was the mastermind behind the murder. Qian Wanli was also amazed in his heart. He didn't think that the main character would be a delicate little beauty. In this way, it would seem that he didn't have any protective feelings for the fairer sex. However, he glanced at the person sitting beside him and coughed. He slammed the gavel and shouted, "How dare you, criminal! Kneel!" Jiang Yuan lowered her eyebrows and quietly knelt down. Only then did she raise her head, revealing a clean and delicate little face. Puzzled, she asked, "Darren, I don't know what crime this commoner girl has committed." Her brows were clear, and her voice was extremely gentle and pleasant to listen to. For a moment, it was like a beautiful painting. Every move she made people involuntarily admire her. The tone of her voice was also very puzzled, as if she really didn't know what was going on. Once again, there was an uproar. The crowd, who had initially been certain, gradually began to waver. Qian Wanli frowned and slammed the gavel. "Silence." The criminal Jiang Yuan killed the servant girl Channing and threw her body into the dry well. Both the witness and the material evidence are present. Let's see how you deny it. As he finished speaking, he shouted towards the outside, "Bring the witness." A trace of dissatisfaction flashed in the eyes of Wang Darren, who was sitting beside him. This method of investigating a case was simply like seizing by force. There was almost no room for anyone to speak. It was unyielding and crude. It was as if the criminal had been hastily charged with a crime and couldn't wait to be convicted. The witness was quickly brought in. Today, Chen Zhao had changed into a set of white clothes and was extremely clean. When he entered the hall, he rushed towards Qian Wanli and bowed. Qian Wanli asked, "Chen Zhao, did you personally witness Jiang Yuan killing someone?" Replying Darren's words, "Yes." Chen Zhao replied. He glanced at Jiang Yuan. "I personally saw Miss Jiang kill Channing and drag her into the well." There was another round of discussion among the crowd. With such conclusive evidence, it seemed that Jiang Yuan had indeed killed someone. Jiang Yuan raised her head to look at Chen Zhao. "I have a few questions. Can Darren allow me to ask him?" Qian Wanli looked at Wang Darren, who was at the side. Wang Darren waved his hand, and Qian Wanli then said, "Ask away." Jiang Yuan smiled slightly, "Thank you, Darren. I would like to ask Chen Zhao, did you see me kill someone? Yes. Chen Zhao replied, at that time, I was outside the house and saw Miss kill Chunning in the house with my own eyes. Chen Zhao, let's not talk about how you, an outsider, can enter my courtyard as you please. Since you saw me kill someone, yet you didn't come in to stop me. Instead, you watched as I killed someone and threw the corpse. Isn't this considered helping the wicked commit evil? If I am really convicted, shouldn't you also receive punishment? Chen Zhao stared blankly and subconsciously said, no, when I saw her, she was already dead. Then, Jiang Yuan said indifferently, you are saying that when you saw Chunning, she was already a dead person. How did she die? Why did she die? Why are you so certain that I killed her? You only saw a corpse, but you didn't see me kill someone, right? Chen Zhao reacted and immediately shook his head, no, at that time, there were only you and her. Moreover, your actions were indeed killing someone. Qian Wanli nervously clenched his handkerchief, his expression not very good. He heard Jiang Yuan continue, all right, even if you saw me kill someone, according to what you said, there was no one else by my side at that time. However, I am only 10 years old now, while Chunning is already 18. My height is not even up to Chunying's chest, so how did I carry Chunying's corpse for such a long distance before throwing her into the dry well? Can you explain it more clearly? You dragged her, Chen Zhao stuttered, beads of perspiration appearing on his forehead. Liar, Jiang Yuan shook her head, Chen Zhao, before you lie, perhaps you should first think about it. The difference between Chunning and I is too big, and I don't have that much strength. Chunning is taller than me, stronger, and more agile. How could I possibly stab her heart with a knife? What knife? She was strangled to death. Chen Zhao roared. Jiang Yuan looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. Oh, is that so? The coroner hasn't conducted the autopsy yet, so how do you know that she was strangled to death? Didn't you say that when you saw her, she was already a dead person? Chen Zhao was drenched in cold sweat, and Qian Wanli's face was as white as a sheet of paper. The testimony that was full of loopholes was already clear to the crowd. Jiang Yuan nonchalantly played with the ends of her hair. Darren, do we still want to continue the trial? Chapter 23. The beauty was like a poisonous flower, fatal with a smile. Chen Zhao's body softened. He felt that Jiang Yuan's gentle words had already dug countless traps. No matter how he answered, it would be wrong. From the beginning, he had lost. Qian Wanli was not much better off than Chen Zhao. Jiang Yuan's actions made it impossible for the case to continue. However, Qian Wanli had accepted money, so he had always done a good job on the surface. Today's thorny situation had already exceeded his expectations. Moreover, there was Wang Darren watching from the side. If he helped Chen Zhao, it would be difficult to convince the masses. He did not know what Wang Darren was thinking by helping Jiang Yuan. He had eaten Chen Zhao's money but was unwilling to spit it out. Moreover, he still planned to make a profit from Jiang Quan. How could he think of a way to satisfy both sides? However, reality did not allow Qian Wanli to think. In a moment, the sound of drums could be heard from outside. Li Mi walked in and cupped his fists towards Qian Wanli. Darren, someone is beating the drum for grievances outside. Beating the drum for grievances, it had been a long time since anyone on Dong Street did such a thing. Everyone was well aware of what kind of place the yamen was. If there was really a grievance, silver was much more useful than beating the drum. If there was no silver, even if they were beaten for a year and a half, no one would pay any attention. Perhaps they would even be arrested and thrown into prison. Qian Wanli was also stunned. Who is crying for grievances? He then looked at Wang Darren and asked, Darren, what do you think? Bring her in. Wang Darren coldly snorted. This snort struck Qian Wanli's heart and he could not help but feel apprehensive. The person was quickly brought in. It was a young lady dressed as a servant. As soon as she entered the court, she knelt down. Who are you? What grievances do you have? Without waiting for Qian Wanli to speak, Wang Daren had already spoken first. Qian Wanli did not dare to stop him. He could only complain in his heart. It seemed that Wang Daren was determined to intervene in this case. Unfortunately, he could not refuse. This imperial censor Wang was the emperor's favorite. Normally, he would submit many memorials. This person was like a smelly and hard rock, unable to withstand thousands of strands. In the end, all the officials who were implicated by him did not end up well. It could be said that Censor Wang was the god of plagues in the hearts of the officials. Now that this god of plagues had spoken, he did not dare to be negligent. Even though silver was good, he had to protect his position first. Qian Wanli made up his mind. He did not care about Chen Zhao's money or Jiang Quan's side. Today, with Imperial Censor Wang in front of him, he wanted to play the role of a righteous and just official. Thinking of this, Qian Wanli said kindly, "If you have any grievances, feel free to tell us the truth. This official and this official will seek justice for you." The people outside roared with laughter. Qian Wanli's words made them laugh their heads off. A dog official who did all kinds of evil making such a solemn vow would only make people think that he was putting on an act. Chen Zhao looked at Qian Wanli in shock. Suddenly, a wave of panic rose in his heart. Things did not develop as he had expected. Qian Wanli's attitude was unclear. What if he changed sides at a critical moment? The young lady respectfully rushed forward and kowtowed, "Thank you, Daren, for seeking justice for this servant. This servant is not complaining for myself, but for young Lady Jiang. This servant is the head maidservant of the Jiang family's manor. This servant can testify for young Lady Jiang. The one who killed Chunning was not young Lady Jiang, but him, Chen Zhao." She raised her head and revealed a familiar face. It was Qiu Yan. "Qiu Yan, what nonsense are you talking about?" After Chen Zhao's initial panic, he was in disbelief. No matter what, Qiu Yan should be on his side. There was no reason for her to help Jiang Ruan. Now that she had come out to testify against him, what was her purpose? This servant is not lying. Qiu Yan did not even look at Chen Zhao. This servant and Chunning are both the head servant of the manor. Normally, we live together. That day, this servant went out to buy something. When I returned, I heard a strange noise in the house. For a moment, I did not dare to enter. So, I peeked through a small hole in the window and saw Chen Zhao pressing Chunning to the ground. Chen Zhao covered her mouth and nose. At that time, Chunning was no longer struggling. This servant was scared to death and was afraid of being discovered by him, so I escaped. After that, I did not dare to mention this matter to anyone. Who knew that yesterday, Miss would be imprisoned? Although this servant is a person who is greedy for life and afraid of death, I cannot watch an innocent person take the blame for this demon. After thinking about it for a long time, I came out to testify. Dead wench, what nonsense are you spouting? How many benefits has Jiang Ruan given you for you to slander my son like this? The great and just God is impartial. Naturally, he will know who is lying. Be careful not to be thrown into prison. Little whore, when you come out, see if this old woman will not tear your mouth apart." Among the crowd, a familiar voice shouted loudly. It was Zhang Lan. Initially, when she saw that everything was going smoothly for Chen Zhao, she saw that Jiang Ruan's words were already somewhat anxious. Now that Qiu Yan had come out to stir things up, Zhang Lan was already aware of the danger. She did not care about the situation and started cursing like a shrew. When these kinds of words reached Qian Wanli's ears, he did not feel happy. Looking at Imperial Censor Wang, who was already frowning, Qian Wanli slammed the gavel. Silence. When the crowd quietened down, Qian Wanli then asked Qiu Yan, "Do you have any evidence for what you have said?" Jiang Ruan smiled lightly. In the quiet court, her smile was especially clear. It felt as if a gentle breeze blew into one's heart. Seeing everyone's gaze on her, Jiang Ruan slowly said, "Daren, you don't have to think that Qiu Yan is speaking up for me. Everyone in the manor knows that other than Bai Ji and Lian Xiao, We are not familiar with all the servant girls in the manor. Jiang Ruan's smiling gaze fell on Qiu Yan. I am also very surprised that Qiu Yan is willing to testify for me. Qiu Yan somewhat avoided Jiang Ruan's gaze. This servant just does not want to go against my conscience. You are lying. Chen Zhao said angrily, you are obviously talking nonsense. You are colluding with him to frame me. You are really funny. Jiang Ruan raised her eyebrows and looked at him. I have been staying in the prison all day and have never had the chance to communicate with Qiu Yan. Could it be that we have colluded before? But how did we know that you, Chen Zhao, would bring officials to the courtyard to arrest people yesterday? Could it be that I am a ghost or a demon? Chen Zhao looked at the absolutely beautiful and elegant face in front of him. Her eyes were limpid like spring water, but they could make one unconsciously fall into a trap. Her lips were full like flower petals, but they always spat out harsh words. Her eyebrows were moving like a demon, but there was a faint murderous aura. She was not a fairy, but a demoness. She was not a beauty, but a viper. A trace of panic flashed in Chen Zhao's heart. He only felt that the other party had changed from a charming beauty to a terrifying demon, and her entire body was filled with an inauspicious aura. This servant can also testify for Miss Jiang. The murderer was not Miss Jiang. Another voice cut in at the right time. Chapter 24. The sudden voice interrupted everyone's discussion. Imperial Censor Wang waved his hand, bring her in. The person who spoke was brought in by the Yamen runners. She was also a young lady dressed as a servant. She knelt down as soon as she entered, but her speech was very sharp, replying to Darren's question, I know that Miss Jiang was wrongly accused. What do you mean? Imperial Censor Wang asked anxiously. The servant girl raised her head, revealing a round face that was still childish. It was Lu Zhu, who had a bit of friendship with Lian Xiao. She scratched her head. Chen Zhao said that on the night Chuning Jijia died, I was carrying the washed clothes from the courtyard outside when I passed by Miss Jiang's courtyard. At that time, I heard movement in the well. At first, I was very scared, but later, I thought it was a cat's meow, so I ignored it. Lu Zhu thought for a while, but at that time, I wanted to talk to Lian Xiao Jijia, but there was no one in the room. Miss Jiang was not in the courtyard, so it was even more impossible for her to have thrown Chuning Jijia into the well. Just as Lu Zhu finished speaking, another voice came from outside, I can also testify for Miss Jiang. This servant met Chen Zhao outside that day. At that time, Chen Zhao was in a hurry, and it was already late at night. He looked extremely flustered. At first, I did not understand, but now that I think about it, I'm afraid that he had just killed someone and wanted to splash this basin of dirty water on Miss Jiang. This time, the one who spoke was Xiao Yuan. The situation seemed to have reversed, and all kinds of evidence pointed towards Chen Zhao. Chen Zhao did not expect that so many servant girls would come forward to accuse him, and his mind was in a mess. He looked at Jiang Ruan in confusion, and could not think of when Jiang Ruan had bribed these servant girls. While Chen Zhao was out of his wits, Zhang Lan, who was outside, was so anxious that her eyes were red. She wished she could break through the Yamen runners' blockade and barge in. Her mouth could not stop scolding. At a time of life and death, she could not care less about her status as a servant. Her string of vulgarities were all directed at Zhang Ruan. The surrounding people frequently cast sidelong glances at her, but they admired the calm Miss Jiang. Qian Wanli could see that Chen Zhao would not be able to get any benefits from today's incident. He did not know whether Jiang Ruan was lucky or had a benefactor helping her, for her to be able to come back from a hopeless situation. He looked at Censor Wang. My lord, what do you think? Censor Wang waved his hand and said, Qiuyan, you said you saw Chen Zhao kill with your own eyes, do you have any evidence? Chen Zhao heaved a sigh of relief. He had done his job very well that day. He was absolutely confident that he would not leave any traces behind. Even if he sent someone to investigate, they would not be able to find anything. Qiu Yan nodded, yes. Chen Zhao was taken aback. Censor Wang asked, what is it? Replying to milord's question, at that time, this servant personally saw Chen Zhao choking Chun Ying's neck. Chun Ying must have resisted with all her might because Chun Ying had scratched Chen Zhao's neck. Darren only needs to see if there are any scratches on Chen Zhao's neck, and if there are any bloodstains on Chun Ying's nails, then you will know the truth. Chen Zhao's heart skipped a beat and he subconsciously grabbed his neck. Censor Wang waved his hand without hesitation and ordered a few bailiffs, go forward and inspect. Chen Zhao wanted to struggle, but his body was not as sturdy as the bailiffs in the yamen. He was subdued in a few moves. Li Mi went forward to inspect and reported to Censor Wang, replying to milord, there are scratches. Censor Wang nodded, someone, go and see if there are any bloodstains on Chun Ying's nails. Chen Zhao knew that he had lost the upper hand. His body went limp and fell to the ground. Very quickly, the people who went to inspect returned and confirmed that there were bloodstains on Chun Ying's nails. Censor Wang shouted, how dare you, Chen Zhao? You killed someone to silence them and destroyed the corpse to erase the evidence. You dare to slander others? Now that both the witness and the evidence are here, there is no way to deny it. Do you plead guilty? Chen Zhao knelt down and kowtowed anxiously. As he kowtowed, he shouted, spare my life, milord, spare my life. I was just muddle-headed for a moment, no, it was a moment of carelessness. I did not intend to kill her on purpose. She was the one who threatened me, and I was angry. I did not do it on purpose. Milord, please spare me. When Zhang Lan, who was outside, saw this scene, she felt her vision blacking out and fainted among the crowd. Censor Wang ordered his men to bring Chen Zhao away. The trial had come to this point and it was considered a climax. The people on the eastern street had not seen such an exciting case for a long time. The steward's son was a thief who cried, stop the thief. He killed someone but blamed the young mistress. It was a heinous crime. Everyone thought that the matter was about to end. Who knew that an untimely voice rang out again? A bailiff came over and reported, milord, someone is beating the drum for injustice again. Ah, beating the drum again? Qian Wanli almost jumped up. He looked at Censor Wang and felt even more guilty. He did not know why there were so many people beating the drum for injustice today. From Censor Wang's point of view, it was because of his lack of discipline that led to so many unjust cases. When he thought about this, even though Qian Wanli felt extremely uneasy, he had no choice but to put on a straight face and said, bring her here. The person who was brought in was also a servant girl. The crowd could not help but discuss what day it was today. Why were all the servants beating the drum for injustice? When the servant girl was brought in, Censor Wang asked, what injustice do you have? The servant girl kowtowed. In reply to milord's question, this servant is crying for injustice on behalf of my young mistress. Your young mistress, who is she? Qian Wanli asked curiously. My young mistress is Miss Jiang, the servant girl replied. Lian Xiao also smiled at her. Her smoke ring was slightly red. She turned her head and kowtowed to Censor Wang again. This servant may be so bold as to ask milord, as a servant girl, how should I be punished for mistreating my mistress and even deliberately plotting to murder her mistress? Censor Wang stiffened his neck. A country has its laws and a family has its own rules. Although the matters of servants are governed by the family's laws, the family rules follow the country's laws. Plotting to murder a person is already a great crime and should be severely punished. Good. Lian Xiao nodded. In that case, milord, I will cry for injustice on behalf of my young mistress and Su Zhanglan and her mother. My young mistress has been living in the rural residence for 5 years and has suffered all kinds of cruel mistreatment. Zhanglan and his family have bullied my young mistress for her kindness, forcibly occupying her property and abusing her at every turn. In the last 9 days, she has gone up the mountain to chop firewood, and in the cold winter, she has gone down the river to wash her clothes. My young mistress has been living in the rural residence for 5 years and has never had a full meal. She has never enjoyed a good day. Sewing clothes, embroidering to earn money, living with rats and being eaten by ants. When she is sick, there is no medicine to cure her. She has withered like weeds. Lian Xiao spoke tirelessly, causing the people around her to shed tears. There was no lack of soft-hearted women in the crowd who had long cursed the viciousness of Zhang Lan's family and felt sorry for this young mistress. Even Qian Wanli could not help but sigh. Even the children of ordinary families lived better lives than Jiang Wan. Lian Xiao had yet to finish her words when she raised her head. If this can be ignored, this servant can only blame heaven and earth for being unfair and have nothing else to say. However, murder must be paid with one's life. Even if it was an attempted murder, one must still pay the price. Chen Zhao pushed my young mistress into the water and attempted to murder her. Who knew that my young mistress was lucky and managed to escape from the hands of the King of Hell alive? First Master, please uphold justice for my young mistress and punish those evil people.